Hey there, tonight we're uncovering the brutal practices of medieval torturers. What you're about to discover is that the infamous Iron Maiden was more fiction than fact, but the real methods were chilling enough to haunt the darkest dreams. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now find your comfort zone, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's venture into tonight's story together. Medieval justice wasn't exactly a beacon of fairness, more like a flickering torch in a dank stone chamber. You might be wondering how we got there, to a time when pulling fingernails and stretching limbs were considered perfectly acceptable legal procedures. Well, buckle up, because we're diving into a world where the feudal system and the church got together and said, hey, you know what would really spice things up? Torture. Let's start with the feudal system, that medieval pyramid scheme where everyone owed something to someone else. At the top, you had the king, dripping in gold and decisions. Below him, a hierarchy of lords, knights, and peasants, each with their own set of responsibilities, and shall we say, creative methods of enforcing them. The idea was simple. Keep everyone in line through a mix of loyalty, and when that failed, sheer terror. Torture was not just about getting the truth. It was a political tool wielded with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Now for the church. Ah, the medieval church, which was busier than a one-armed juggler. You've got to hand it to them. They knew how to wield influence. The church claimed moral authority over souls, and what better way to purify a soul than through a bit of righteous suffering? The Inquisition, that infamous tribunal of faith, was less about burning witches, and more about rooting out heresy with a zeal that would make a caffeine-fueled detective look lazy. The church didn't invent torture, but they sure perfected its use as a means of control. In a world where hellfire was as real as bread and ale, the threat of eternal damnation backed by earthly torment was a powerful motivator. Forget the romantic image of the dungeon master, a hooded figure lurking in the shadows with an arsenal of rusty tools. Torture was institutionalized, a bureaucratic affair overseen by people in robes rather than rags. It was less about the sadistic whims of individuals and more about maintaining order. The medieval justice system was obsessed with confession, and what better way to extract one than with a little discomfort? Numbers are sketchy, but it's safe to say a surprisingly high percentage of confessions were obtained under duress. Who would have guessed? And then there's the myth of the medieval dungeon, that dark, dank pit where prisoners languished. The reality: dungeons were more like temporary holding cells, not permanent residences. Torture chambers were often situated in places of authority like castles, because nothing says power like a well-equipped basement. Consider the Tower of London, a place more synonymous with imprisonment than an all-inclusive vacation. Its basement was a space where the Crown's authority was exerted one rack turn at a time. Speaking of racks, let's talk about the economics of torture. You think torture was cheap? Those devices were an investment. A good rack might cost as much as a farmer's yearly earnings. That's right. An entire year's worth of toil for a machine designed to pop your joints like bubble wrap. It was a visible reminder of who was in charge, and an economic deterrent for those considering a career in rebellion. But why such brutality? Why not just lock people up and throw away the key? Well, it's complicated. In a time without modern policing, letting someone stew in a cell for years was impractical. You needed quick results and public displays to keep the populace in line. Trials were often swift, sometimes lasting mere hours. The aim was to reinforce the hierarchy, show that stepping out of line had immediate, painful consequences. And here's the kicker: this whole system of justice was based on deterrence, not fairness. The medieval mind was less concerned with rehabilitation and more about making an example out of someone. A public execution or a display of torture was a community affair, a lesson in loyalty and obedience for all to see. It was social control at its most visceral. Let's not forget the role of superstition. Ah, medieval Europe, where the line between science and the supernatural was blurrier than a drunk's vision. Illnesses were often thought to be divine retribution, and deviance was a sign of satanic influence. Torture was a way to cleanse the soul, to drive out the demons through excruciating means. It was less about getting to the truth and more about confirming what the authorities already believed. So, next time you hear about medieval torturers, remember, these weren't rogue sadists, but state-sanctioned enforcers in a world where power was everything. The medieval judicial system was a reflection of its time, an era where might made right and fear was a tool as sharp as any blade. As we peel back the layers of myth and reality, we begin to understand that the brutality of the medieval world was not an anomaly, but an integral part of its identity. So, with the medieval judicial system as grim as a Game of Thrones family reunion, let's swivel our focus to the real stars of this macabre show, the tools of the trade. We're talking about racks, thumbscrews, and other instruments that make your average medieval toolkit look like a torture starter pack. These weren't slapped together with a bit of wood and some rusty nails. Oh no, these devices were crafted with a level of skill that might have impressed even the most discerning artisan. First up, the rack. The rack, a device so infamous, its name is practically synonymous with medieval torture. Picture this, a wooden frame, some ropes, a few gears, and a lot of grim determination. The rack was the medieval version of a chiropractor's worst nightmare, designed to stretch the human body to its limits, and then some. Think of it as a full-body workout that no one wanted to sign up for. But here's where things get particularly interesting. Constructing a rack wasn't cheap. In fact, it might set you back about £10 sterling, which, for context, was more than a skilled craftsman earned in a year. Talk about making an investment in human misery. But why such an expense? Well, the rack was more than just a tool for terror. It was a statement of power, a physical manifestation of authority that said, "This is what happens when you cross us." It was psychological warfare as much as physical, a deterrent far more potent than any prison cell. And remember, back then, confessions were the gold standard of guilt. The rack wasn't just about pain. It was about extracting the truth, or at least a version of it that suited the authorities' narrative. Now, let's move on to the thumbscrews, the torture device equivalent of a medieval fidget spinner. These nifty little gadgets were all about precision pain, applying focused pressure to a subject's thumbs or fingers until they sang like a canary. They were portable, easy to use, and required a minimal investment, perfect for the inquisitor on the go. A blacksmith might whip up a set of thumbscrews in an afternoon, and they'd be ready to bring the hurt to your local heretic. But don't let their simplicity fool you. Thumbscrews were deceptively efficient. In an era where most people relied on their hands for their livelihood, threatening a craftsman's fingers was like dangling an axe over an artist's canvas. And here's the kicker. Once again, the aim wasn't just physical pain. It was about psychological domination, a reminder that power could be wielded with a twist of the wrist. Let's not forget the more exotic items like the Iron Maiden or the notorious Judah's Cradle. However, spoiler alert, these were more myth than reality, at least in the Middle Ages. The Iron Maiden, a sarcophagus spiked with nails, likely didn't exist until the 18th century, despite its cinematic fame. It's a classic case of history giving us a narrative that's too juicy to resist, because who doesn't love a little gory embellishment now and then? But back to the economics of torture. Running a torture chamber wasn't just about having the right tools. It was about logistics. You needed a space, preferably one with soundproofing, because no one wants to hear the screams over dinner. You needed staff, from skilled torturers to guards ensuring no one made an unscheduled exit. And then there were the materials. Ropes, wood, iron, all costly commodities in a medieval economy. Torture wasn't an amateur operation. It was a full-fledged enterprise. The tools and the chambers were investments in social order, just as much as they were instruments of pain. Think of it like a medieval police force, only with fewer donuts and more heart pokers. The balance of power in medieval society was like a tightrope walk over a pit of alligators, and torture was the big stick used to keep everyone in line. And speaking of power, let's not overlook the role of confession in this whole grim affair. In a world where written records were as rare as hen's teeth, verbal confessions were the bedrock of justice. A confession obtained under duress might be shaky by today's standards, but back then it was as solid as the castle walls. It was all about maintaining the status quo, reinforcing the hierarchy with every admission of guilt. So, when you think of medieval torturers, don't picture a lone sadist in a dank dungeon. Picture a well-oiled machine, a system as intricate and brutal as the tools it used. Torture wasn't just a method. It was an industry, a reflection of the times where fear was currency and power was the ultimate goal. The tools of torture were more than instruments of pain. They were the hammers and nails of a society built on authority and control. As we continue on this journey through the darker corridors of history, remember that the story of medieval torture is not just one of horror, but of human ingenuity directed toward the most sinister ends. It's a tale where every turn of the rack and twist of the screw tells us as much about the world that used them as the people who suffered under their grip. So, stay tuned as we delve further into this murky world. There's plenty more to uncover, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. Now, let's shift our focus from the tools of the trade to the unfortunate souls who found themselves in the clutches of medieval justice. Spoiler alert, the victims weren't just your stereotypical bad guys. Oh no, everyone from peasants to nobles could find themselves on the wrong end of a torturer's enthusiasm. This wasn't an exclusive club for the nefarious. It was more like an indiscriminate sweepstakes where everyone had a lottery ticket. First, let's talk about the crimes that could land you in hot water or on a hot poker. Forget modern concepts of justice. Medieval justice was the Wild West of legal systems. Theft, murder, and treason were the obvious big hitters, but the medieval mind had an expansive definition of criminal behavior. Did you criticize the king's policies? Treason. Dispute the church's teachings? Heresy. Accused of witchcraft because your neighbor's cow mysteriously stopped giving milk? Well, you might as well start practicing your confessions. Speaking of witchcraft, let's debunk the myth of the medieval witch hunt. While it's tempting to picture hordes of women being rounded up and burned at the stake, the truth is a bit more nuanced. The witch hunts that Hollywood loves to dramatize didn't reach their fever pitch until the early modern period, particularly during the 16th and 17th centuries. In medieval times, accusations of witchcraft were certainly dangerous, but they didn't yet have the hysterical backing of later witch craze fervor. That said, you wouldn't want to be the odd one out in a village where superstition ran rampant. A little weirdness, or simply being an independent-minded woman, could put you on a fast track to interrogation. But let's get back to the broader spectrum of victims. The medieval justice system didn't discriminate based on social class, or rather, it did, but not in the way you'd hope. While peasants often bore the brunt of brutal punishments, nobles weren't entirely immune. Sure, if you had the right connections and a hefty purse, you might avoid the worst of it, but power struggles and political machinations often meant that even the well-born found themselves in the hot seat. Just ask Richard Roman III contemporaries who ended up headless or worse after a bout of political intrigue. Economically, the stakes were high, both for the accused and the accusers. Let's say you were a farmer who'd had won too many ales and started mouthing off about your liege lord. Before you knew it, you could find yourself paying a hefty fine, or worse, suffering a physical punishment that would leave you unable to work your fields. For the authorities, this wasn't just about punishing you. It was about sending a message to your fellow villagers. The cost of dissent was clear. Toe the line, or you might not have any toes left to tow it with. And let's not forget the role of torture in extracting confessions for crimes of heresy. The church had a vested interest in rooting out dissenters, and in their minds, a coerced confession was better than none at all. Heretics, often those who dared to challenge the ecclesiastical status quo, found themselves prime candidates for a session with the inquisitors. The fate of these individuals wasn't always death. Sometimes they were given a chance to recant and be welcomed back into the fold, after a suitable period of penance, of course. But make no mistake, the threat of eternal damnation backed by a few rounds on the rack was a persuasive argument. Now, here's where we get to the real kicker. The use of torture wasn't just about crime and punishment. It was a societal performance, a grim theater where the audience learned the consequences of stepping out of line. Public executions and torture displays were community events, as thrilling as a medieval fair, only with more blood and fewer jesters. The spectacle served as a reminder of the power hierarchy, reinforcing the social order with every scream. The records from the time paint a vivid picture of this brutal reality. Take, for instance, the case of Jacques de Marley, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar. Accused of heresy and blasphemy, he was tortured into confessing to crimes that were likely fabricated. His eventual execution by burning in 1314 was a public affair, designed to obliterate both the man and the legend of the Templars. It was a clear message to anyone who thought of challenging the Church's authority. Cross us, and you'll find yourself in a world of hurt, literally. But let's not paint the entire medieval populace as passive spectators to this brutality. There were those who questioned the morality of torture, though they were often voices in the wilderness. Theologians and legal scholars occasionally debated the ethics of coerced confessions and the use of torture, but in a world where power often trumped morality, such debates rarely led to reform. The machinery of medieval justice kept chugging along, fueled by fear, superstition, and the unyielding desire for control. So, what's the takeaway from this macabre exploration of medieval victims? It's that no one was truly safe from the reach of the torturer's tools. The system was a great equalizer in its brutality, reminding everyone from peasant to prince that power was the ultimate arbiter of justice. The medieval era wasn't a place for the faint-hearted or the dissenting voice. It was a time when speaking your mind could cost you more than just your freedom. And as we wrap up this segment, keep in mind that the story of medieval torture is far from over. We've got more myths to bust, more truths to uncover, and more historical insights to explore. So, stay tuned as we continue our journey through this grim chapter of human history, where every revelation is as shocking as it is enlightening. And so, with more myths to bust and truths to uncover, let's get cozy with the folks who were pulling the strings behind the medieval curtain. The torturers themselves. These weren't the basement-dwelling sadists of Hollywood's fevered imagination. Nope, they were more like mid-level managers of a grim corporate machinery. If you were expecting Hannibal Lecter in a hood, sorry to disappoint. These guys were the pencil pushers of pain, more bureaucrat than butcher. Take, for example, Heinrich Kramer, a name that sounds like it should come with a villainous mustache. Kramer was one of the infamous authors of the Malleus Maleficarum, a handbook for witch hunters that was less about factual accuracy and more about creative storytelling. Think Harry Potter, but with more pitchforks. He wasn't a torturer per se, but his influence spread like wildfire across Europe, providing a legal framework for inquisitors to follow. Bought by the thousands, this book was basically the medieval version of a bestseller, with all the accuracy of a tabloid headline. Now, let's talk about the myth of the evil genius torturer. Picture your typical medieval torturer, and you might imagine a maniacal rogue with a penchant for rusty tools. The reality, far less glamorous. These individuals were often civil servants, working their way up the medieval career ladder. Torturers were appointed by local authorities, and they had a job to do: extract confessions, maintain order, and keep the gears of justice grinding. The infamous William, the Butcher of Paris, is a prime example. His nickname might suggest a bloodthirsty psychopath, but he was simply a cog in the judicial wheel. William was a master executioner in the late 14th century, tasked with carrying out the gruesome penalties mandated by the state. It was a job that required precision and efficiency, not sadistic glee. In fact, his successors often remembered him more for his professionalism than any personal vendetta. The dude knew his business, and he did it well. And let's not skip over the economics of it. Torturers weren't rolling in gold coins from a dragon's hoard. In fact, they were often paid per job, with rates varying depending on the complexity of the task. A typical execution might earn a torturer a few pennies, while a more intricate torture session could rake in a bit more. It was a gig economy before Uber was a twinkle in anyone's eye. Now, what about the infamous devices themselves? Were these torturers designing their own tools, inventing ever more creative ways to inflict pain? Hardly. The tools of the trade were handed down from inquisitor to inquisitor, with standard designs that had been perfected over centuries. It was less about innovation and more about maintaining the status quo. When your job involves pulling confessions out of people like teeth at a particularly medieval dentist, you stick with what works. But here's where things get tricky. Despite their bureaucratic nature, torturers did leave a legacy, just not the one you might expect. Their work sparked debates about the morality and efficacy of torture, debates that echo into modern times. The unintended consequence of their grisly work was a growing awareness of human rights, a slow but steady march towards legal systems based on evidence rather than coercion. The public, too, began to question the spectacle of torture. As cities grew and societies became more interconnected, the need for public displays of brutality began to wane. The grisly theater that once served as a warning to the masses started to feel less like justice and more like barbarism. People began to ask, was this really necessary? And let's not forget the social ripple effects. Torture wasn't just about breaking bones. It was about breaking communities. The fear it instilled could fracture social bonds, turning neighbor against neighbor in a climate of suspicion and paranoia. When you're worried that a slip of the tongue could land you on the rack, chit-chatting over the proverbial medieval water cooler becomes a risky business. So, what's the takeaway from this grim chapter? Torturers were not lone wolves, but functionaries in a vast machine, enforcing a brutal brand of justice that was less about personal malice and more about maintaining order. They were products of their time, driven by necessity and orders from above. But the legacy of torture in the medieval era is a mixed bag. It cast a long shadow over history, a reminder of what happens when power is unchecked and fear is the currency of control. Yet it also planted the seeds for change, forcing societies to confront the darker aspects of their justice systems. As we leave behind the torturers and their complex legacy, remember, history is full of uncomfortable truths and surprising insights. The past isn't just a foreign country. It's a mirror reflecting our own dilemmas and decisions. So, as we continue this journey, keep your eyes peeled for more revelations. The story of medieval justice isn't over yet, and trust me, there's a lot more to discover. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where we dive even deeper into the labyrinth of history. No dungeon required. But here we are, standing on the precipice of history, pondering the shadows cast by medieval justice. You're probably thinking, surely we've moved past the days of racks and thumbscrews, right? Well, strap in, because we're about to take a wild ride through the echoes of the past that still resonate in our modern justice systems. Fast forward a few centuries, and the Enlightenment came along like a breath of fresh air, or at least a draft through a particularly drafty castle. Philosophers like Cesare Beccaria started questioning the moral fiber of torture, arguing that justice should enlighten rather than terrify. His 1764 essay, On Crimes and Punishments, was a game-changer, advocating for proportional punishment and the abolition of torture. In fact, it was so revolutionary that you could practically hear the collective gasp of every European monarch clutching their pearls, or their crowns, as it were. But don't pop the champagne just yet. While medieval torture devices fell out of favor, the mindset of using fear as a control mechanism didn't just vanish into a puff of logic. The guillotine, introduced during the French Revolution, was heralded as a more humane execution method. Remember, this was a time when humane meant chopping off a head in one swift motion rather than a protracted hanging. Progress, right? And let's not forget the modern prison system, which emerged as an alternative to public executions and torture. It was the 19th century's answer to crime and punishment, a place to reflect, reform, and repay your debt to society. The United States, ever the trailblazer, opened Eastern State Penitentiary in 1829, complete with solitary confinement designed to encourage penitence. The irony: this isolation often led to madness rather than moral awakening. As it turns out, swapping one form of psychological torture for another wasn't quite the leap forward we'd hoped for. But the legacy of medieval justice doesn't stop there. Modern interrogation techniques, while devoid of racks and iron maidens, often walk a fine line between coercion and confession. The infamous third-degree interrogation methods of the early 20th century, involving physical and psychological pressure, echo the confessions once extracted in medieval dungeons. It wasn't until the mid-20th century, with the introduction of the Miranda rights in the U.S., that suspects were formally reminded of their right to remain silent. The lesson here: sometimes it takes a while for common sense to catch up with law and order. Economically, the echoes of medieval torture can still be seen in the way justice is, in many ways, a commodity. The cost of maintaining prisons, the legal fees that can bankrupt the accused before they've even set foot in a courtroom. It's all a modern twist on the economic burden that once saw racks and ropes as investments. Today's justice system might be less about physical coercion and more about financial strain, but the end game remains eerily similar: control and compliance. Politically, the shadow of medieval justice looms in the way governments wield power. The Patriot Act in the U.S., introduced after 9/11, allowed for increased surveillance and detention without trial, a modern echo of the arbitrary power once held by kings and inquisitors. While the tools and technology have evolved, the fundamental question remains: how much power should a state have over its citizens? It's a debate that's as old as time, or at least as old as the feudal system. Socially, the remnants of medieval justice manifest in our fascination with true crime and courtroom drama. Shows like Law and Order and Making a Murderer captivate audiences, feeding the same morbid curiosity that once drew crowds to public executions. We might not gather in town squares anymore, but our screens serve as a modern arena for justice, judgment, and the occasional miscarriage thereof. It's a reflection of our continued struggle with morality and justice, a nod to the medieval belief that punishment must be seen to be believed. And speaking of myths, let's debunk a few more. The romanticized notion of knights in shining armor and chivalrous deeds often glosses over the brutal realities of medieval law. The truth is, even the noblest knight could find themselves on the receiving end of justice if they crossed the wrong lord. Today, we might idolize historical figures, but it's crucial to remember that their lives were often as complicated as our own. The past wasn't a fairy tale. It was a series of hard choices and harsher consequences. So, what's the takeaway from this historical roller coaster? It's that the medieval justice system, for all its brutality, was a logical part of its time. It was a world where fear was as essential as food, and order was maintained through a delicate balance of power and punishment. The methods may have changed, but the underlying themes of justice, control, and human nature remain surprisingly consistent. As we wrap up this journey through the corridors of medieval justice, let's leave with a sense of perspective. History is a mirror, reflecting not just where we've been, but where we're headed. The legacy of medieval torture isn't just in the tools or the trials. It's in the lessons we learn and the progress we strive to make. It's a reminder that while the past may be dark, it's also a guidepost lighting the way towards a more just and equitable future. So next time you hear about medieval torturers or the grim realities of the past, remember, history is as much about the present as it is about what's come before. It's a tale of human ingenuity and folly, of progress and pitfalls. And as we continue to write our own chapter in this ongoing story, let's strive to learn from the past rather than repeat it. After all, those who ignore history are doomed to repeat it, or worse, relive it on a Netflix documentary. If you found yourself in mid-19th century America, you'd be standing on the precipice of a technological revolution right before the world got its first electrifying jolt. Among the many curious minds of this era was a kid named Thomas Alva Edison. Little Tom was the kind of kid who didn't just play with toys. He wanted to know what made them tick, sometimes to the dismay of his family. One of his more explosive childhood curiosities involved a homemade chemistry lab in the family basement. Now, you'd think a basement would be a safe haven for a budding scientist. But when young Edison conducted his first experiment, it wasn't long before the place went kaboom, leaving a singed carpet and a rather peeved mother. The lesson here: always read the safety instructions. If they existed back in 1850, that is. Speaking of the 1850, this was a time when America was a hotbed of innovation, much like a startup accelerator today, minus the fancy bean bags and endless coffee supply. The country was on the move, literally. Railroads were crisscrossing the nation like a toddler on a sugar rush, and telegraph lines were the new social media, transmitting information faster than ever. The economy was booming, driven by industrialization and a spirit of relentless tinkering. The telegraph, in particular, was a marvel of its time, turning the world into a smaller, more connected place. It's no surprise that young Tom Edison found himself drawn to this world of wires and signals. Fast forward a few years, and Edison's first job was as a telegraph operator. Picture him there, a teenager with a penchant for invention and a knack for short-circuiting things. Literally. One infamous incident involved a bottle of sulfuric acid. Now, sulfuric acid isn't exactly harmless, as Edison's employers would soon find out. During one particularly hectic day, the bottle tipped over, spilling its contents and causing a small disaster. The acid ate through the floor, and as if on a mischievous mission, proceeded to drip onto the desk below. much to the horror of Edison's colleagues. Not exactly a page from the manual on how to make friends at work. But here's the kicker. Edison's blunders were as legendary as his breakthroughs. His early mishaps might have been a nightmare for his employers, but they were also a testament to his relentless experimentation. He wasn't afraid to fail, and in the mid-1800, that was a radical mindset. The economic backdrop of this period was fueled by a belief that the American dream was tangible, and innovation was the ladder to reach it. Edison's fearless tinkering was perfectly in tune with an era that celebrated invention, even if it sometimes led to a few spills and explosions along the way. This was a time when patents were the golden tickets of innovation, and everyone wanted a piece of the industrial pie. The U.S. Patent Office was practically drowning in applications. Edison alone would eventually file over 1,000 patents in his lifetime. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. The young Edison, even then, motivated by more than just personal gain. He was driven by a genuine curiosity about how things worked and a desire to improve them, even if the path was littered with broken bottles and frazzled colleagues. Now, let's not romanticize too much. The reality of Edison's early life wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. Financially, the Edison family wasn't rolling in dough. His father, Samuel Edison, tried his hand at various enterprises, from lumber to real estate, but stability was elusive. It was Nancy, Thomas's mother, who played a crucial role in nurturing his inquisitive nature. She was his first teacher, homeschooling him after a brief and unimpressive stint in public school. Thanks to her guidance, Edison developed a voracious appetite for reading and learning, a trait that would serve him well in his future endeavors. But back to our young inventor's early days in the world of work. The telegraph office was a perfect playground for Edison. It was there that he honed his skills, learning Morse code and mastering the art of sending and receiving messages. The telegraph was the internet of the 19th century, and Edison was like a teenage hacker, eager to push the boundaries of what could be done with a series of darts and dashes. And sure, he made mistakes, some of them quite literally shocking, but each mishap was a stepping stone towards a greater understanding of how to manipulate the world around him. The political and social landscape of the time also played a role in shaping Edison's journey. The Civil War had recently ended, and the country was in a phase of reconstruction and reinvention. There was a collective hunger for progress, and technology was seen as the key to a brighter future. In this environment, people like Edison were not just inventors, they were visionaries, shaping the world with their ideas and creations. The patent system, which was revamped in the mid-1800s, provided a legal framework that encouraged innovation by protecting inventors' rights and allowing them to profit from their inventions. And so, as Edison muddled through his early career, he was also laying the groundwork for the future. Each acid spill and short circuit was a lesson learned, a piece of the puzzle that would eventually lead him to become one of the greatest inventors in history. But for now, he was just a young man with a curious mind and an insatiable desire to learn. His story is a reminder that even the most successful journeys begin with a few missteps, and that sometimes you have to break a few beakers to make your mark on the world. As Edison fumbled through his early career, each mishap was a stepping stone that taught him the ropes of invention and entrepreneurship. But before he earned the title of Wizard of Menlo Park, Edison's first claim to fame was a little more, shall we say, lackluster. Enter the automatic vote recorder, an invention that promised to revolutionize how decisions were made in Congress. It was a clever contraption meant to speed up the voting process, a real time saver for politicians who needed to get back to the serious business of doing whatever 19th century politicians did in their spare time, like twirling their mustaches or perfecting the art of the handshake. Now, here's where Edison's idealism collided with political reality. The vote recorder was a technical marvel, but it flopped harder than a pancake at breakfast. Why? Because it turns out Congress wasn't exactly in a rush to speed up the voting process. The slow pace of voting allowed time for persuasion, or what some might cynically call lobbying, a time-honored tradition, after all. So, while Edison's invention was a marvel of efficiency, it was as welcome in Congress as a skunk at a garden party. This failure was a harsh but invaluable lesson for Edison. Market need is king. The best invention in the world is about as useful as a chocolate teapot if nobody wants it. Fast forward a bit, and Edison had another crack at innovation, but this time he understood the importance of market demand. With $10,000 in his pocket from some New York financiers, which in today's money would be like getting a small fortune from a mysterious benefactor, Edison set up his first lab in Menlo Park, New Jersey. This was not just any lab. Oh no, this was Edison's very own Batcave, minus the bats, and with a lot more wires. Menlo Park was where the magic happened, a place that would become synonymous with invention and creativity. Here, Edison assembled a team of brilliant minds, and together they worked like alchemists on the quest to turn ideas into the gold of the industrial age. And now, let's talk about the phonograph, an invention that really got the public talking, or listening. In this case, when Edison introduced the phonograph in 1877, it was a PR stunt that would make any modern marketing guru green with envy. Picture this. The press and public gathered around as this strange contraption played back their own voices, an eerie yet thrilling experience. It was as if Edison had pulled a rabbit out of a hat. Only this rabbit could play back your last conversation. The phonograph wasn't just a novelty. It was a cultural earthquake that shook people's perception of sound and communication. This little device didn't just record sound. It recorded Edison's reputation as a genius. The phonograph became a sensation, saving Edison from financial ruin and cementing his name in history. It was the kind of success story that makes you feel all warm and fuzzy inside, until you realize that Edison was also a master of self-promotion. He knew how to work a crowd and make headlines, a skill as crucial to his success as any of his inventions. But let's pop the hood on this Genius of the Century label. Yes, Edison was brilliant, but he was also a shrewd businessman who knew how to leverage his inventions. The romantic notion of the lone genius toiling away in his lab is as appealing as it is misleading. Edison had a team of inventors working alongside him, a fact that gets conveniently glossed over in the highlight reels of history. He was the Steve Jobs of his day, part inventor, part salesman, and entirely aware of the power of branding. And so, Edison's early inventions and escapades at Menlo Park laid the foundation for what would come next. He learned the hard way that innovation is as much about understanding the market as it is about the eureka moments. His ability to pivot from the vote recorder failure to the phonograph triumph is a testament to his resilience and adaptability. As we continue to journey through Edison's life, we'll uncover more of his inventions, his triumphs, and yes, a few more of those delightful blunders that remind us he's only human. Until then, remember that behind every great inventor is a trail of burnt-out light bulbs and a few singed carpets, but more on that in the next installment. Now, as much as we'd love to romanticize the idea of Edison as a lone genius conjuring inventions from thin air like some kind of industrial-age sorcerer, reality is a little less glamorous and a lot more crowded. You see, the creation of the electric light bulb was more of a team sport played out on the field of Menlo Park. Edison didn't just snap his fingers and light up the world. He had a battalion of brilliant minds, often referred to as muckers, working alongside him. These were the unsung heroes of innovation, the ones who actually got their hands dirty, while Edison played the role of conductor, orchestrating a symphony of science and sweat. So, let's shine a bit of light on this legendary invention, shall we? First off, Edison wasn't the first to invent the electric light. In fact, he wasn't even the 20th. By the time he started fiddling with filaments, there were already more than 20 patents related to electric lamps. What Edison did, however, was improve on existing designs to create something practical and commercially viable, a feat that was no small potatoes. The key to a successful bulb was finding the perfect filament, that magical thread that would glow without burning out faster than a shooting star. Edison and his team tested over 6,000 different materials in their quest for the ideal filament. They tried everything from bamboo to hair from a friend's beard. Yes, you heard that right, beard hair. It's the kind of desperate creativity that would make even Mac Jiver raise an eyebrow. But let's not gloss over the financial fiascos Edison faced during this electrifying endeavor. Developing a reliable light bulb required serious cash. We're talking about research and development costs that would make a venture capitalist wince. Edison burned through about $40,000, roughly equivalent to a cool million in today's dollars. He even had to borrow some of it, persuading investors with the kind of charm you'd expect from a man who could sell sand in a desert. Despite these challenges, Edison's persistence paid off when, in 1879, he finally unveiled a bulb that could last for 5 hours. Not exactly marathon material, but it was a start. By the end of the year, he had a bulb that could burn for up to 200 hours, a game-changer in a world where candles and gas lamps were the norm. Edison didn't just want to light up a room, he wanted to light up the world, and he had the audacity to think he could actually do it. Now, before we get swept away in the glow of Edison's success, let's take a step back and meet the real MVPs of Menlo Park. Take Francis Upton, for example, a math whiz and Princeton graduate who played a critical role in the development of the electric light. Upton was more than just a number cruncher. He was the kind of guy who could see the big picture while still sweating the small stuff. Or how about Charles Batchelor, a British engineer who was one of Edison's closest confidants and a key player in the lab? These were the guys who did more than fetch coffee. They were instrumental in turning Edison's vision into a functional reality. But Edison's path to illumination wasn't as smooth as a freshly paved road. Enter stage left, Nikola Tesla and George Westinghouse, two formidable rivals who would give Edison a run for his money. Tesla, with his brilliant mind and eccentric flair, was like the Rockstar of electrical engineering. He championed alternating current, AC, a system that was in direct competition with Edison's direct current, DC. Meanwhile, Westinghouse, a savvy businessman with a knack for innovation, saw the potential in AC and threw his weight behind it. This rivalry wasn't just academic. It was a high-stakes power struggle that became known as the War of Currents. Edison, ever the showman, went to great lengths to discredit AC, even staging public demonstrations where he electrocuted animals to show the dangers of Tesla's system. It was a PR move as dark as it was desperate, and it showed just how cutthroat the business of electricity had become. Despite Edison's theatrics, AC ultimately won the day, thanks in large part to its ability to transmit power over long distances, a crucial advantage in a sprawling country like the United States. But don't shed too many tears for Edison. While he might have lost the battle of the currents, his DC system found its niche in certain applications, and his other inventions continued to rake in the dough. So, what's the takeaway here, besides the fact that Edison wasn't above a little showmanship to protect his interests? Perhaps it's that innovation is rarely a solitary endeavor, and that competition can be a powerful catalyst for progress. Edison's story is a reminder that even the most dazzling inventions are often born from a little collaboration, a lot of trial and error, and a healthy dose of rivalry. As we leave Edison and his crew in the glow of their invention, remember that there's more to this tale. The electric light bulb was just one of many innovations that would shape the modern world, and Edison's journey was far from over. In the next installment, we'll delve into the expansion of Edison's electric empire, the creation of the first power station, and the continuing saga of his rivalry with Tesla and Westinghouse. Until then, keep those lights on and your curiosity burning bright. As Edison basked in the glow of his electric triumph, he was already setting his sights on the next big thing. This time, his gaze fell upon the world of motion pictures, a realm that promised to bring moving images to the masses, long before Netflix binges were a thing. Enter the kinetoscope, a device that would let people peek into a box to see a short film, like an old-school TikTok, but with fewer dance challenges and more mustache twirling. The kinetoscope was born from Edison's relentless pursuit of innovation. In the early 1890s, his lab at West Orange, New Jersey, became a hive of activity, buzzing with the sounds of gears, film reels, and the occasional frustrated inventor. Edison, never one to miss a chance to be at the frontier of technology, envisioned a world where people could watch films in parlors, much like flipping through a photo album, but with more pizzazz. Now, let's talk numbers. The kinetoscope was patented in 1891, and by 1893 it was ready to hit the market. It wasn't exactly pocket change to own one, either. Each kinetoscope cost about $250, which is roughly equivalent to $7,000 today. Imagine trying to justify that expense to your 19th century spouse. But honey, it's the future of entertainment. The first kinetoscope parlor opened in New York City in 1894, charging patrons 25 cents to view a selection of films. The novelty caught on like wildfire, and soon kinetoscope parlors were popping up faster than you could say, lights, camera, action. But the kinetoscope wasn't without its quirks. It only allowed for one viewer at a time, making it less of a communal experience and more of a solitary affair. Picture a Victorian gentleman peering into a box, monocle firmly in place, while a line of eager spectators formed behind him. Hardly the IMAX experience. Despite this limitation, the kinetoscope marked a significant leap forward in the world of entertainment, laying the groundwork for the cinematic experiences we cherish today. As Edison dabbled in the magic of moving pictures, he was also embroiled in one of history's greatest scientific rivalries, the infamous War of Currents. This epic showdown wasn't just about electricity. It was about ego, ambition, and the future of power distribution in America. On one side, we had Edison, staunch advocate of direct current DC. On the other, the dynamic duo of Nikola Tesla and George Westinghouse, championing alternating current AC. Now, if you ever find yourself in a debate about AC versus DC, remember this. Edison's DC was like sending a letter by foot courier, a reliable method, but limited in range and efficiency. Tesla's AC, on the other hand, was like having a supersonic jet deliver your message. Fast, far-reaching, undeniably impressive. AC was capable of transmitting electricity over long distances, a crucial advantage in a rapidly expanding nation. Edison, however, was determined to protect his DC investments, and the resulting battle was nothing short of electrifying. Edison's tactics during the War of Currents were as controversial as they were creative. He famously orchestrated public demonstrations where he electrocuted animals to prove the dangers of AC. It was a PR strategy straight out of a horror movie, designed to incite fear and skepticism about the safety of Tesla's system. Despite Edison's best efforts, AC ultimately emerged victorious, thanks to its superior efficiency and the backing of Westinghouse's financial muscle. The 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago showcased the power of AC, lighting up the fairgrounds with a dazzling display that left DC flickering in the shadows. While Edison might have lost the war, he wasn't exactly left in the dark. His numerous inventions continued to generate wealth and fame, securing his place in the pantheon of great inventors. Meanwhile, Tesla, the brilliant but often overlooked genius, continued to push the boundaries of science, eventually becoming a cult figure revered by tech enthusiasts and conspiracy theorists alike. Amidst these electrifying escapades, Edison found time to experiment with one of his more peculiar inventions, the talking doll. Sounds delightful, right? A toy that could recite nursery rhymes and lull children to sleep. Well, not quite. The doll's voice was recorded on a tiny phonograph concealed within its body, but the result was less Mary Had a Little Lamb and more Nightmare on Elm Street. The doll spoke in a scratchy, eerie tone that could send shivers down the spine of even the bravest child. It's safe to say the talking doll was not one of Edison's finest moments. It hit the market in 1890, but customer complaints about the doll's unnerving voice and fragility led to its swift demise. Edison himself admitted the voices of the little monsters were exceedingly unpleasant to hear. Of course, Edison's career wasn't all horror dolls and current wars. He was also a master of the courtroom, engaging in epic legal battles over patents. At the time, the patent system was a minefield of litigation, with inventors constantly suing and countersuing to protect their creations. Edison was no stranger to this arena, wielding his patents like a seasoned swordsman. He fought fiercely to defend his intellectual property, amassing a formidable legal team and taking his disputes all the way to the Supreme Court when necessary. One of the most famous legal duels involved the incandescent light bulb. Edison faced challenges from rivals who claimed they had developed similar technologies. The courts, however, ultimately sided with Edison, cementing his reputation as the father of the modern electric light. This victory was a testament to Edison's determination and business acumen, proving that in the world of innovation, the battle for recognition was as fierce as the race to invent. As Edison navigated the tumultuous waters of invention, competition, and litigation, he never lost sight of his ultimate goal, to improve the world through technology. His later years were marked by a series of ambitious projects, from developing a domestic source of rubber to creating an efficient method for mining ore. Not all of these ventures met with success, but they showcased Edison's relentless drive to explore new frontiers. In the midst of his many endeavors, Edison's legacy continued to grow. By the time he passed away in 1931, he held 1,093 patents, a staggering number that remains unmatched to this day. His contributions to science and technology have left an indelible mark on the modern world, shaping the way we live, work, and play. Yet, as we celebrate Edison's genius, it's important to remember the less glamorous aspects of his journey. His story is not just one of triumph, but also of tenacity, rivalry, and the occasional misstep. Edison's life serves as a reminder that innovation is rarely a straight path, and that even the most brilliant minds must navigate the messy realities of human ambition and competition. As we prepare to conclude our exploration of Edison's life, in the next installment, we'll delve into the impact of his inventions on society and the enduring influence of his vision. From the flicker of a light bulb to the flicker of a film reel, Edison's legacy is one of constant illumination, a testament to the power of curiosity and the relentless pursuit of progress. Stay tuned as we unravel the final chapters of this remarkable tale, exploring the lasting echoes of Edison's genius and the lessons we can learn from a life lived in the electric light. So, here we are at the final act of the Thomas Edison extravaganza. Before we dim the lights on his life story, let's take a moment to soak in the luminescent legacy he left behind, a legacy that flickers in everything from your smartphone to your local cinema. Edison wasn't just the guy who lit up the night. He was the blueprint for the modern entrepreneur, a title that, let's face it, he'd probably slap on a business card today if he could. Now, you might think of Edison as the guy who turned light bulbs from luxury items into household staples, and you'd be right. But his influence stretched far beyond illuminating living rooms. Consider the modern power grid, a sprawling network of cables and stations that keeps our gadgets buzzing and our coffee makers brewing. This grid's roots trace back to Edison's first power station on Pearl Street in New York City. Established in 1882, it was the world's first commercial power station and lit up a whopping 59 customers. Not exactly Netflix and chill, but a start. Edison's vision of centralized power distribution laid the groundwork for the electrical infrastructure that powers our 21st century lives. Let's sidestep into how Edison was the original tech mogul. His Menlo Park laboratory wasn't just an inventor's paradise. It was a factory of innovation operating like a startup with a caffeine-fueled team. Edison's tireless tinkering produced the phonograph, motion picture camera, and yes, the electric light. But his real genius lay in creating an environment where innovation could thrive. He was the Steve Jobs of his day, a charismatic leader who inspired a generation of inventors to think beyond the possible. Edison also knew how to play the economic game. He understood that an invention wasn't worth a dime if it couldn't be monetized. His adeptness at navigating the patent system, securing 1,093 patents in his lifetime, wasn't just about protecting his intellectual property. It was about creating a commercial empire. Take the light bulb. By perfecting and patenting a commercially viable version, Edison didn't just invent the bulb, he invented an industry. The economic impact was seismic, transforming not just technology, but entire business models. And while we're dissecting myths, let's address the notion of Edison as a solitary genius. The romantic image of Edison alone in a lab is as outdated as a gas lamp. The man had a team, a veritable brain trust of engineers and scientists who were crucial to his success. Edison was smart enough to surround himself with talent and savvy enough to harness their collective genius. This collaborative approach was a precursor to the teamwork-driven innovations we see in today's tech giants. But what about the man himself? Edison was a curious blend of visionary and pragmatist, a man who could dream big but also understood the value of a dollar. He wasn't above using clever marketing tactics to promote his inventions, even if it meant bending the truth or engaging in the occasional PR stunt. Remember those public animal electrocutions during the War of Currents? A dark chapter, but it underscored Edison's understanding of public perception. Edison's life wasn't all triumphs and ticker-tape parades. His career was peppered with failures and missteps, from the vote recorder flop to the hauntingly eerie talking dolls. Yet these failures were as integral to his legacy as his successes. They taught him, and us, that innovation is a messy business. You win some, you lose some, and sometimes you end up with a creepy doll in the bargain bin. In the end, Edison's legacy is a complex tapestry of innovation, entrepreneurship, and the occasional ethical gray area. He was a man of contradictions, both a champion of progress and a ruthless competitor. His story reminds us that behind every great inventor is a trail of burnt-out filaments and a few singed ambitions. As we flick off the lights on Edison's tale, let's remember him not just as the Wizard of Menlo Park, but as a prototype for the modern innovator, a relentless dreamer with an eye on the future and a firm grip on the present. Whether you're streaming a movie or flipping a switch, Edison's fingerprints are all over the modern world. So here's to the man who wasn't afraid to break a few bulbs to light up our lives. When it comes to tales of legendary figures, Simon Bolivar's story kicks off with all the trappings of a rags-to-riches narrative, minus the rags. Born on July 24, 1783 in Caracas, Venezuela, our man Simon was essentially the Richie Rich of his day, minus the comic strip antics. His family was loaded, and I mean loaded. We're talking vast estates, slaves, so much silver they could have smelted their own Bolivar-branded coins. His father, Juan Vicente Bolivar y Pont, had more titles than a Netflix library, and his mother, Maria de la Concepcion Palacios y Blanco, wasn't exactly a pauper herself. But wealth doesn't buy happiness, folks. It doesn't even guarantee a steady family life. Simon was orphaned before he hit 10, a tragic start that would fuel a firestorm of rebellious energy in his later years. Now, if you're expecting a Dickensian struggle, adjust your expectations. Despite being parentless, Simon was the heir to one of the top fortunes in Venezuela, and with great fortune comes great education. Well, sort of. His guardians made sure he had tutors to cram his head with Latin, mathematics, and all those subjects that would bore the average teenager to tears. But young Simon wasn't about that life. He was a bit of a rebel, a real teenage maverick. He'd skip classes and engage in all sorts of hijinks, like sneaking off to the nearby hills to explore. His tutors must have had more grey hairs than a parliament of owls. But what really shaped Simon's future wasn't his formal education. It was his European tour, the 19th century equivalent of a gap year, only with less backpacking and more dodging tutors. At the ripe age of 16, Simon was shipped off to Europe in 1799, partly to straighten him out, but also to educate him in the ways of the world. Europe was a smorgasbord of ideas, and Simon was hungry. He soaked up the Enlightenment principles like a sponge, devouring the works of Rousseau, Voltaire, and Montesquieu. These weren't just bedtime stories for him. They were revolutionary manifestos. The Enlightenment was a time when everyone seemed to think they could change the world just by thinking hard enough about it. Simon bought into it, hook, line, and sinker. Now, if you think Simon was all about dusty libraries and philosophical debates, think again. His European escapade was as much about the social scene as it was about learning. He rubbed elbows with high society and saw firsthand how the other half lived. And by other half, I mean the half that was not under colonial rule. This was a pivotal moment for Simon. He started to see the cracks in the imperial facade, the injustice in a system that left people like him ruling over a population that was anything but free. But wait, there's a plot twist. Love enters the scene. In 1802, Simon, still a teenager at the tender age of 19, married Maria Teresa del Toro y Aleza. It seemed like a fairy tale ending was on the horizon, but tragedy struck like a Greek drama. Just 8 months into their marriage, Maria contracted yellow fever and died. Heartbroken, Simon was a widower before he was 21. This devastating loss could have left him a melancholic figure, wallowing in his wealth. Instead, it acted like a catalyst. With nothing left to tie him emotionally to Spain, Simon returned to Europe, this time with a vengeance, or at least a thirst for revolution. Back in Europe, his studies continued, but the focus shifted. Simon wasn't just a student of philosophy anymore. He was a student of revolution. He met with other like-minded individuals who shared his vision of independence for South America. It was during this time that he famously pledged to free his homeland from Spanish rule. Legend has it that he made this vow atop Monte Sacro in Rome, while the romantic image of Bolivar, solemnly declaring his mission to liberate his people, is indeed stirring. Let's not forget that vows like these were often made after a few too many glasses of wine, and perhaps a touch of youthful bravado. As Simon's revolutionary fervor grew, he became increasingly convinced that South America was ripe for independence. The continent was like a pressure cooker, ready to explode. The Napoleonic Wars had weakened Spain, and the colonies were itching to break free. Simon saw an opportunity, and unlike some procrastinators out there, he wasn't about to let it slip by. His return to Venezuela in 1807 wasn't just a homecoming. It was the beginning of a seismic shift in Latin American history. He returned not as the prodigal son, but as the prodigal revolutionary leader, ready to challenge the status quo with a head full of Enlightenment ideas and a heart full of revolutionary zeal. So, what do we take away from this part of Bolivar's life? Sure, it's easy to romanticize the wealthy orphan who turns into a heroic liberator. But the crux of Simon's story lies not in the luxury of his upbringing, nor in the tragic loss of his wife. It's in the transformative power of ideas and the audacity to act on them. Bolivar was a man who saw the world not as it was, but as it could be, and he was ready to do whatever it took to make that vision a reality. Stay tuned, because if you think this was a wild ride, just wait until you see what happens when Simon Bolivar really starts to shake things up in South America. So, Bolivar's back in Venezuela, not to sip piña coladas on the beach, but to kick off a revolution. And let me tell you, his early attempts at liberating South America were about as smooth as trying to dance the tango with two left feet. We're talking 1810-1812 here, folks, a time when Bolivar's aspirations were as grand as his missteps. It all starts in 1810, when the political climate was harder than a jalapeno. The Spanish crown was in shambles, thanks to Napoleon's European antics, and the colonies smelled opportunity. Caracas, Bolivar's hometown, declared independence on April 19, 1810. It wasn't exactly the 4th of July fireworks, but it was a start. Simon was back in the fray, not as a bystander, but as a member of the revolutionary junta. And here's where the fun begins, or the chaos, depending on how you look at it. Now, Simon wasn't exactly George Washington leading the Continental Army. His first military forays were more like a series of unfortunate events. Picture this: a guy with more enthusiasm than experience, trying to lead a bunch of poorly equipped and even more poorly trained men. It was a learning curve steeper than the Andes. Bolivar's forces often found themselves retreating faster than you can say, "Viva la Revolución." But Bolivar, bless his heart, was nothing if not persistent. He took part in the First Republic of Venezuela's efforts to consolidate power. This republic, by the way, was about as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. Internal divisions, financial woes, and Spanish loyalists, who were about as welcome as a mosquito at a nudist colony, made governing nearly impossible. Yet this was Bolivar's crucible. It was here he learned that revolution wasn't just about waving a flag and giving rousing speeches. It was dirty, gritty, and filled with more backstabbing than a Shakespearean play. And oh, the defeats. The Spanish were like that one really persistent fly that just won't leave you alone. In 1812, Bolivar's army faced significant setbacks. The Spanish forces, led by Domingo Monteverde, were making a comeback, and Bolivar's men were often caught with their pants down. Figuratively, of course. The First Republic crumbled faster than a stale cookie, and Bolivar had to hightail it to Cartagena. It's like the universe was telling him, not so fast, amigo. But here's where Bolivar's story takes a darker turn. Frustrated and desperate, he issued his infamous decree of war to the death on June 15, 1813. This was less of a rallying cry and more of a grim ultimatum. Spanish loyalists were to be executed, but anyone who joined the Republican cause would be spared. It was brutal, sure, but these were desperate times. Bolivar was in a corner, and he came out swinging. This decree was a game-changer, adding a new layer of intensity to the already volatile situation. It's easy to romanticize Bolivar as a noble liberator, but let's not sugarcoat it. These were not the actions of a man sipping tea and philosophizing about freedom. This was a leader in the trenches, doing whatever it took to keep the dream of a free South America alive. The decree was as much about psychological warfare as it was about military strategy. It sent a clear message. There was no turning back. You were either with him or against him. Meanwhile, the economic situation was a hot mess. Funding a revolution isn't exactly cheap, and with the Spanish blockade cutting off trade like a bad date ghosting you, resources were scarcer than hen's teeth. Bolivar had to rely on wealthy patrons and the goodwill of those who believed in the cause. This was no small feat, considering the local economy was teetering on the brink of collapse. Despite the harsh realities, Bolivar's charisma and sheer force of will kept the revolutionary spirit alive. His vision for a unified and independent South America was intoxicating, even if the path to get there was paved with setbacks and sacrifices. He wasn't just fighting battles on the field. He was battling the very idea of colonial rule, a concept as entrenched as a stubborn mule. So, what do we make of Bolivar's first attempt at revolution? It was a roller coaster of triumphs and tragedies, a baptism by fire that forged a leader out of a dreamer. The romantic image of Bolivar as a liberator is compelling, but the reality was a lot grittier. He was a man driven by an unyielding vision, willing to endure the harshest of trials to see it through. And while this chapter of his life wasn't filled with sweeping victories, it set the stage for the epic saga that was to follow. Stay tuned, because Bolivar's story is far from over. The wheels of revolution have only just begun to turn. As the dust settled from the First Republic's collapse, Simon Bolivar found himself at a crossroads, fueled by ambition and a smoldering desire for independence. This wasn't a time for licking wounds. It was a call to arms, and Bolivar was about to orchestrate a comeback worthy of a Hollywood blockbuster. Enter the admirable campaign of 1813, a military blitzkrieg that would make you rethink everything you thought you knew about the man they called El Libertador. Picture this: Bolivar in Cartagena, rallying support like an impassioned rock star on a comeback tour. He penned the Cartagena Manifesto, a fiery piece of writing that laid bare his frustrations with the First Republic's failures and outlined a blueprint for success. Bolivar didn't just want a revolution. He wanted a revolution done right. The manifesto was a cocktail of military strategy, political theory, and pure charisma, shaken, not stirred. By April 1813, his forces were ready to march against Spanish control, and thus began the admirable campaign. Now, the name might sound like a PR move, but it was aptly chosen. Over 123 days, Bolivar led his ragtag army of about 650 men through the Andes into Venezuelan territory, covering some 500 kilometers. This wasn't just a march. It was a Herculean feat of endurance and strategy. Imagine leading troops through terrain more treacherous than a teenager's mood swings, facing not just enemy forces, but also the unforgiving elements. Bolivar's men were like a mobile United Nations, a mix of locals, foreign mercenaries, and even some British volunteers who probably thought they were signing up for a tropical vacation. Bolivar's cunning wasn't just in his ability to move troops. His diplomatic skills were sharper than attack. He knew that to win this war, he needed to unite the disparate factions of a fractured society. Venezuelans, Creoles, mestizos, and indigenous people all had to be on the same page for his dream to work. Bolivar became a maestro of alliances, juggling various interests like a circus performer balancing on a unicycle while juggling flaming torches. His speeches were legendary, rallying not just his troops, but also the civilian population. He was the original motivational speaker, with a flair for the dramatic. By August 1813, Bolivar had taken Caracas, and the Second Republic of Venezuela was proclaimed. Cue the confetti, right? Not quite. Establishing a republic was one thing, keeping it afloat in a sea of chaos was another. This was the wild west of South America, where political stability was about as common as a snowstorm in the Sahara. Bolivar had to be more than a general. He had to morph into a statesman, mediator, and at times, a stern disciplinarian. The Second Republic's challenges were colossal. Bolivar needed to maintain order in a land rife with social and economic upheaval. We're talking about a region where loyalty shifted faster than the latest TikTok trend. The economy was in tatters, thanks to years of war, and Spain wasn't exactly going to sit back and watch its colonies slip away. They were sending reinforcements faster than a pizza delivery on a Saturday night. Bolivar had to not only defend his gains, but also convince the population that this new republic was worth fighting for. The Second Republic was a crucible of trial and error. Bolivar's leadership style evolved from sheer charisma to a more nuanced approach. He implemented reforms to stabilize the economy and attempted to streamline the chaotic governance structure. However, his vision of unity was constantly tested by internal divisions and external threats. It was like trying to keep a sandcastle intact during high tide. Bolivar's strategic genius shone through as he navigated these turbulent times. He understood that holding territory was as psychological as it was physical. His campaigns weren't just about winning battles, they were about winning minds. Bolivar was a master of propaganda, crafting narratives that inspired loyalty and hope. He was well aware that in the battle for independence, perception was half the victory. But let's not paint too rosy a picture. Bolivar's methods weren't always genteel. His decree of war to the death still loomed large, a grim reminder of the lengths he'd go to achieve his aims. This wasn't a man content with half measures. When the chips were down, Bolivar played to win, even if it meant making forced bargains or enforcing brutal measures to ensure compliance. In this historical game of chess, Bolivar was both king and queen, moving across the board with precision and foresight. His ability to adapt to shifting alliances, manage limited resources, and inspire a diverse populace was nothing short of extraordinary. He wasn't just a military leader. He was a political visionary, a man who saw a unified South America as more than a dream. It was a necessity. As the Second Republic faced mounting pressure, Bolivar's resilience became his hallmark. He wasn't just battling Spanish forces. He was up against the deeply entrenched colonial mindset. The task ahead was enormous, a Goliath of historical proportions. But Bolivar was undeterred. His story was far from over, and the revolution's wheels were still turning, ready to carve out a new chapter in South America's turbulent saga. Stay tuned, folks, because the tale of Simon Bolivar is just warming up, and the best is yet to come. As Bolivar's tale of resilience and revolution continued, the stakes were higher than ever, and the man was far from ready to throw in the towel. By 1816, Bolivar was primed for a comeback tour across South America that would make any Rockstar envious. This time, he wasn't just armed with his indomitable spirit. He had learned a trick or two from his earlier bruises, turning that hit-and-miss strategy into a full-on hit-and-win campaign. The liberation campaigns from 1816 to 1824 were like a grand symphony, with Bolivar as the maestro, orchestrating a series of audacious military feats and strategic pivots that would leave the Spanish crown scrambling like tourists in a rainstorm. This wasn't just a war. It was the war to end colonial rule in South America, and Bolivar had his sights set on nothing less than total liberation. Let's talk about the crossing of the Andes in 1819, a feat so legendary it makes Hannibal's jaunt through the Alps look like a Sunday stroll. Bolivar's army, numbering around 500 men, embarked on this treacherous journey with more optimism than common sense. Traversing one of the world's most formidable mountain ranges in the dead of winter is less epic march and more frostbite-inducing hike, with temperatures plummeting to bone-chilling lows that could make a penguin shiver. The journey was a logistical nightmare. Supplies were scarcer than a politician's promises, and the terrain was as unforgiving as a spurned lover. Yet, Bolivar's ability to inspire his men was nothing short of miraculous. He was like a human battery, energizing his troops with a mix of charismatic speeches and sheer willpower. The Andes crossing was a do-or-die mission, and Bolivar was determined to come out on the winning side. And win he did. The crossing culminated in the Battle of Boyacá on August 7, 1819, a clash that was as much about brains as it was about brawn. Bolivar's forces were outnumbered, but not outclassed. They danced circles around the Spanish troops, using guerrilla tactics and strategic maneuvers that left the enemy bewildered and ultimately defeated. The victory at Boyacá was the turning point for the liberation of New Granada, now Colombia. Not one to rest on his laurels, Bolivar continued to push forward with the zeal of a man possessed. The Battle of Carabobo in 1821 was another jewel in his revolutionary crown. Here, Bolivar capitalized on his newfound military prowess, leading an army of 500 men against a Spanish force of similar size. The result, a resounding victory that sealed the fate of Venezuela's independence. Bolivar's military genius was matched only by his political acumen. He was a master of the pivot, both on the battlefield and in the political arena. In the aftermath of Carabobo, he turned his attention to Ecuador, a land as divided as a family at Thanksgiving. Through a blend of diplomacy and force, Bolivar managed to unite the disparate factions and secure the region's independence by 1822. The liberation of Peru and Bolivia was next on Bolivar's revolutionary itinerary. Peru was the Spanish stronghold, the last bastion of colonial power, and Bolivar knew the stakes couldn't be higher. By this point, his reputation preceded him. He was the embodiment of liberation, a walking, talking symbol of freedom whose mere presence was enough to rally support. In 1824, the Battle of Ayacucho was the final nail in the coffin for Spanish rule in South America. Bolivar's forces, under the command of his trusted lieutenant Antonio José de Sucre, delivered a crushing blow to the Spanish, effectively ending their colonial grip on the continent. It was the kind of victory that left no room for doubt. South America was free, and Bolivar had cemented his legacy as El Libertador. But let's not get swept away by the romance of it all. The reality was as gritty as it was glorious. Bolivar's campaigns were funded by a patchwork of loans, donations, and sheer audacity. The economies of the newly liberated countries were in tatters, and Bolivar's vision of a united South America was as fragile as a house of cards in a windstorm. The man who had freed a continent now faced the Herculean task of holding it together. Bolivar's dream of a Gran Colombia, a federation that included present-day Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, and Panama, was both ambitious and fraught with challenges. Political infighting was rampant, and the economies were about as stable as a wobbly table. Bolivar's ability to pivot was once again put to the test, this time in the realm of governance. As Bolivar grappled with the political complexities of his newly liberated lands, his health began to wane. The stress of leadership, coupled with the harsh realities of post-revolution governance, took its toll. Yet, even in his declining years, Bolivar remained a figure of immense charisma and influence. His vision for a united South America was as compelling as ever, even if the reality was slipping through his fingers like sand. In the end, Bolivar's story is one of both triumph and tragedy. He was a man who dreamed big and achieved even bigger, yet his legacy is tinged with the melancholy of unfulfilled aspirations. The liberation campaigns from 1816 to 1824 were a testament to his indomitable spirit and strategic genius, but they also highlighted the harsh realities of leadership in a newly independent continent. As Bolivar's tale continues, the wheels of revolution are still turning, each revolution promising a new chapter in the saga of South America's fight for freedom. Stay tuned, because Simon Bolivar's story isn't just history, it's the stuff of legend. Yet, as the ink dried on the treaties that ended Spanish rule, the dream of a united South America began to unravel faster than a politician's promise after Election Day. Simon Bolivar ascended to the presidency of Gran Colombia in 1819, a federation that was supposed to be his magnum opus, uniting modern-day Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, and Panama. But governing this newly minted nation was like trying to herd cats, or more accurately, trying to herd jaguars, each with their own agenda and a penchant for political backstabbing. Gran Colombia was a geopolitical Frankenstein's monster, stitched together with the best intentions, but lacking the cohesive tissue to hold it together. Bolivar's vision of unity was noble, sure, but reality was creeping in like a cold draft under the door. Political instability was the dish of the day, served with a side of regionalism and a dollop of economic woes. Each state was more interested in its own affairs than the grand vision of unity, and Bolivar found himself playing whack-a-mole with revolts and dissenting factions. His attempts to centralize power were about as popular as a skunk at a garden party, leading to a tug-of-war between federalists and centralists that would make even the most seasoned diplomat throw in the towel. Economically, Gran Colombia was a basket case. Years of war had left the coffers emptier than a teenager's fridge, and rebuilding infrastructure was a Herculean task. The grand dream of economic prosperity was overshadowed by the grim reality of debt and disarray. Bolivar tried to implement reforms, but they were about as effective as a chocolate teapot. Inflation soared, and the economy was as stable as a house of cards in a hurricane. The stark truth was that liberation had come at a cost, and the bill was due. Bolivar's health, much like his political aspirations, was in rapid decline. The relentless stress of leadership, compounded by personal ailments, was wearing him down faster than a pair of discount sneakers. By 1828, he was more a shadow of his former self, plagued by tuberculosis, and his once iron will was rusting under the weight of unrelenting challenges. Yet, even as his physical strength waned, his mental tenacity was a force of nature. He attempted to consolidate power by declaring himself dictator of Gran Colombia, a move that was as popular as a lead balloon and led to an assassination attempt. Talk about a bad day at the office. In 1830, the inevitable happened. Bolivar resigned, disillusioned and exhausted, as Gran Colombia began to fracture into its constituent parts. Venezuela, Ecuador, and New Granada, soon to be Colombia, were like rebellious teenagers finally breaking away from their overbearing parent. Bolivar's dream of a united South America had crumbled, leaving him to ponder the bitter irony of his situation. The liberator who had freed a continent now found himself without a country. Bolivar spent his final days at the Quinta de San Pedro Alejandrino in Santa Marta, Colombia. By then, he was a broken man, both physically and financially. Imagine the irony. Simon Bolivar, El Libertador, the man who had once commanded armies and inspired nations, was now living off the charity of friends, his wealth as depleted as his health. It was a humbling end for a man who had once held the fate of a continent in his hands. As Bolivar reflected on his legacy, he found himself caught between the myth and the man. The world saw him as a hero, a liberator, a visionary, but Bolivar knew the truth was more complex. He had achieved the impossible, yet his dreams of unity lay in tatters. His final words, allegedly uttered on December 17, 1830, were a poignant testament to his life's work. How will I ever get out of this labyrinth? It's a question that resonates through the ages, a reminder that even the mightiest of dreams can falter under the weight of reality. In the end, Simon Bolivar's legacy is as multifaceted as the continent he fought to free. He was a man of contradictions, a romantic idealist and a pragmatic leader, a liberator who became a dictator, a hero whose ambitions outran the possibilities of his time. His story is a testament to the power of vision, the complexities of leadership, and the harsh realities that come with daring to dream big. Bolivar's life is a masterclass in the duality of human nature. We romanticize him as El Libertador, yet the truth is as gritty as the Andean soil he once traversed. His victories were hard-won, his defeats humbling, and his legacy is a tapestry of triumphs and tragedies. As we reflect on Bolivar's story, we're reminded that history is never black and white. It's a kaleidoscope of narratives, each one offering a glimpse into the complexity of the human experience. So, what do we take away from the saga of Simon Bolivar? Perhaps it's the realization that true leadership is as much about enduring the struggles as it is about celebrating the victories. Bolivar's life was a marathon, not a sprint, and his journey was fraught with more hurdles than a steeplet chase. Yet, through it all, he remained steadfast in his belief in a free and united South America, even as the dreams slipped through his grasp. As we close the chapter on Bolivar's life, let's not forget the lessons his story imparts. Vision is vital, but so too is the ability to navigate the rocky path of reality. Leadership is a balancing act, a dance between idealism and pragmatism, and Bolivar's tale is a cautionary reminder of the challenges that come with trying to change the world. In the end, Bolivar was more than a liberator. He was a man who dared to dream, and in doing so, he left an indelible mark on history. His story is a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, greatness is within reach. The Indus Valley civilization was like that mysterious neighbor who never throws wild parties, but somehow has the best house on the block. Nestled snugly in what is now Pakistan and northwest India, this ancient society was strategically perched on the subcontinent's northwest. A harp, skip, and a camel ride away from everything important around 2500 BCE. This wasn't just a random plot of land. It was prime, real estate, bordered by the towering Himalayas to the north and the Arabian Sea to the south, with the Indus River running through it like a gleaming thread in Mother Nature's tapestry. This river wasn't just there for scenic boat rides. It was the lifeblood of the civilization, turning what could have been a dusty wasteland into a fertile paradise. Now, let's get one thing straight. The Indus Valley folks weren't just sitting around in loincloths, waiting for history to happen to them. No, sire, were trading up a storm. Thanks to their primo location, they became the ancient world's version of Amazon Prime. Goods flowed through like silk, spices, and whatever else tickled the fancy of ancient shoppers. They had trade links stretching from Mesopotamia to Central Asia, making them the OG globalists. But enough about trade routes. Let's talk about where the magic really happened. The cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. These weren't just any old settlements. They were the Vegas and New York of their time, minus the neon lights and overpriced coffee. Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro were marvels of urban planning that would have made even the most jaded modern city planners pause in admiration. We're talking about streets laid out in a grid pattern, which might sound like a no-brainer today, but back then, it was like discovering fire all over again. And the plumbing. Let's just say that if the Indus Valley people had been in charge of modern infrastructure, we'd probably have functional public restrooms everywhere. Their drainage systems were engineering masterpieces. They had underground sewers so advanced that some modern cities are still trying to catch up. It wasn't just about getting rid of waste. It was about creating a healthy environment that allowed their society to flourish. They even had bathrooms in their homes, a luxury that wouldn't become common in many parts of the world until millennia later. Now, I know what you're thinking. Great sewers, but what about the social structure? Patience, my friend. The social hierarchy of the Indus Valley is a bit of a mystery wrapped in an enigma. Unlike the flashy pharaohs of Egypt or the mighty kings of Mesopotamia, these folks didn't leave behind grandiose statues or monuments proclaiming the greatness of their leaders. Instead, their society seemed to operate on a different wavelength. There's evidence to suggest a more egalitarian system, with less emphasis on individual rulers and more on community-based organization. Sure, they might not have had a king strutting around in a golden chariot, but they had something arguably better, an organized, well-functioning society that thrived without the need for ostentatious displays of power. That's not to say life in the Indus Valley was all peace and cumbaya. There were social divisions based on occupation and wealth, but they kept it low-key, like a hipster coffee shop without the pretentiousness. This understated yet effective social structure might have been influenced by their trade-centric economy. When your livelihood depends on maintaining good relations with neighbors near and far, it makes sense to keep things relatively equitable and harmonious. After all, you can't exactly strong-arm a trade partner into giving you a good deal if you've just insulted their mother. So, what can we learn from the Indus Valley civilization's approach to city planning and social organization? Perhaps it's that sometimes the most revolutionary advancements come not from loud proclamations or grandiose monuments, but from the quieter, more pragmatic developments that improve everyday life. They might not have had a king's throne to flaunt, but they had a society that worked. And in the grand scheme of things, that's something worth celebrating. But let's ease into the Indus Valley's social tapestry, a complex quilt of roles and relationships that somehow didn't need a king's seal of approval to be taken seriously. Picture a society where everyone had a job, but no one wore a name tag a bit like a bustling office without the dreaded open-floor plan. There were artisans, traders, farmers, and more, each contributing to the community's well-being without needing a stone tablet to brag about their lineage or title. Now, you might be wondering, where are the palaces? Surely some bigwig must have had a penchant for flashy architecture, right? Wrong. The Indus Valley civilization was more about function over form. Think of them as the original minimalists. Instead of grand palaces, they had multi-room houses that were practical and well-planned. These homes were uniform yet versatile, with private baths and even rudimentary air conditioning if you count strategically placed windows and ventilation systems. The lack of ostentatious palaces wasn't because they couldn't build them. It was more about priorities. Why spend resources on a glitzy palace when you could invest in robust city walls or sophisticated drainage systems? It's as if they collectively decided that the best way to show off was by not showing off at all. They were like the Steve Jobs of ancient civilizations, opting for simplicity and elegance over unnecessary flash. But let's not mistake this practicality for a lack of social stratification. The Indus peeps weren't living in a socialist utopia. They had social divisions, but they were more subtle than the in-your-face hierarchies of their contemporaries. Instead of a king or a pharaoh adorned in gold, they had a community that seemed to operate on mutual benefit. The closest thing to a ruling class might have been a group of elites or merchants who had a bit more sway due to their economic clout. Yet, even these folks didn't feel the need to immortalize themselves in stone. The absence of temples and regal bling is another clue to their unique worldview. They might have worshipped gods or natural forces, but they didn't build massive structures to house their deities. Instead, religious life was likely woven into the everyday, a seamless part of their existence rather than a spectacle to be staged. This could have been a pragmatic choice, reflecting a society that favored the tangible over the ethereal. After all, when your trade partners are counting on you to deliver goods on time, it's better to focus on the here and now. In this practical utopia, occupational diversity was key. The Indus Valley cities were like ancient Silicon Valleys, filled with skilled workers who specialized in various trades. Artisans created intricate beadwork and pottery that was traded far and wide. Farmers cultivated crops like wheat and barley, staples that would feed both the local populace and the broader trade network. And then there were the traders, the ancient equivalent of today's logistics experts, ensuring that the wheels of commerce kept turning smoothly. This division of labor kept the society humming along like a well-oiled machine. But let's not romanticize this too much. Life in the Indus Valley wasn't all smooth sailing and seamless harmony. Economic disparities likely existed, with some people enjoying more comforts than others. Yet these differences were kept in check by the community-centric ethos that seemed to permeate their way of life. It was less about who had the most and more about ensuring that everyone had enough. The absence of grandiose monuments to individual glory suggests a society that valued collective achievement over personal aggrandizement. The economic context of this society is crucial. The Indus Valley civilization thrived because of its strategic location and robust trade networks. This wasn't a place where you could coast on your ancestors' achievements. Instead, it was a dynamic hub of commerce and innovation, where success depended on hard work and collaboration. In a world where your next meal might come from a trade with a distant land, it paid to keep things equitable and efficient. And yet, the allure of a mysterious ruling class endures, fueled by our fascination with power and prestige. We love the idea of a hidden elite pulling the strings, even when the evidence suggests otherwise. Perhaps this is because, deep down, we find it hard to believe that a society could function so smoothly without a charismatic leader at the helm. But the Indus Valley civilization challenges this notion, showing us that sometimes the best leaders are those who leave the smallest footprints. As we delve deeper into the social structure of this enigmatic civilization, we find that it offers a refreshing counterpoint to the grandiose narratives of kings and empires. It reminds us that history is not always about the loudest voices or the biggest monuments. Sometimes, it's about the quiet achievements of a society that knew how to get things done without the need for fanfare. And in a world that often equates success with spectacle, that's a lesson worth learning. So, as we navigate the mystery of the Indus Valley, remember that the absence of a ruling class, palatial grandeur, or towering temples doesn't indicate a lack of sophistication. On the contrary, it suggests a society that valued substance over style, practicality over pomp. And perhaps, in our modern quest for meaning and purpose, we could take a page from their book. After all, there's something profoundly powerful about a civilization that thrived on the strength of its community and the ingenuity of its people. Let's dive deeper, shall we? The Indus Valley civilization, that enigmatic society without a king's crown or a pharaoh's pyramid, thrived on its economic prowess, grounded in agriculture and trade networks that would make even modern logisticians nod in appreciation. Imagine a civilization where farming wasn't just a chore, but the beating heart of social and economic life. The Indus folks were growing wheat, barley, peas, and the ancient world's rockstar crop, cotton. Yup, they were spinning cotton into textiles around 2500 BCE, while the rest of the world was still figuring out how to keep their togas from unraveling. Their agricultural techniques were as innovative as they were practical. They used an extensive irrigation system to maximize the fertile soil deposited by the Indus River's annual floods. Think of these floods as nature's way of delivering a fresh batch of nutrients. The Indus people were like savvy farmers with a natural subscription to the best fertilizer service of ancient times. This wasn't just subsistence farming. They produced enough surplus to feed their cities and support a vibrant trade network. Now, when we talk about trade, we aren't just talking about swapping grains with the neighbors. The Indus Valley was a bustling hub, with trade links stretching as far as Mesopotamia, Oman, and even the distant lands of Central Asia. It was like the ancient world's version of a trade expo, minus the laminated name tags. They traded beads, cotton textiles, metals, and those famous seals, small rectangular stone carvings used to mark goods and perhaps even contracts. These seals are still turning heads today, not just for their artistry, but because they're inscribed with an undeciphered script that keeps linguists up at night, like a crossword puzzle without clues. This script is one of the greatest mysteries of the Indus Valley. Despite decades of study and some of the brightest minds on the case, we still can't read it. It's like having the password to the internet, but nobody knows what it unlocks. The romantic in us wants to believe these undeciphered symbols hold the secrets to their society, perhaps a record of their triumphs and tribulations. But the reality is, until we crack this enigmatic code, we're left piecing together their story through shards of pottery and the remnants of their cities. Now, let's not get caught up in the image of the Indus people as peaceful, sandal-wearing traders serenely navigating the ancient world. Trade, even back then, was a cutthroat business. Imagine the chaos of a modern stock exchange floor, just with fewer computers and more camels. Economic competition was fierce, and the Indus merchants had to be shrewd negotiators and strategic thinkers. They didn't have the luxury of resting on their laurels. Maintaining trade networks required constant vigilance, negotiation, and sometimes a bit of good old-fashioned cunning. And let's not forget the challenge of resource management. The Indus Valley's prosperity depended heavily on its natural resources, especially the fertile lands fed by the river. But this wasn't a guaranteed boon. The river could be capricious, its flooding unpredictable, and managing this delicate balance of nature was a constant battle. It required sophisticated planning and community cooperation, not just to thrive, but to survive. So, while they might not have been building ziggurats or pyramids, they were constructing something far more crucial, a society resilient to the whims of nature and the pressures of trade. But here's the kicker. While the Indus Valley civilization was an economic powerhouse, they left no grandiose monuments behind to trumpet their achievements. No towering statues or gilded palaces. Instead, their legacy is found in the practicality and sophistication of their cities, the ingenuity of their technologies, and the breadth of their trade connections. This was a civilization that valued the tangible over the symbolic, the practical over the ostentatious. It was as if they collectively decided that the best way to ensure their story would be told was through the things they made and the lives they lived, rather than the monuments they left behind. So, as we explore their economic backbone, we see a society that was both innovative and pragmatic, thriving in a world where survival depended as much on resource management and trade acumen as on the whims of the river guards. Their story reminds us that history isn't always about the grand gestures or the loudest triumphs. Sometimes it's about the quiet, steady progress of a people who knew how to turn a fertile river valley into the heart of a civilization. And as we continue to unravel their mysteries, we find that the Indus Valley civilization has much to teach us, not just about the past, but about the resilience and ingenuity that drive human progress. And there you have it, a snapshot of a society that knew how to get things done, even if we can't yet read their instruction manual. As we move forward, we'll continue to explore the layers of their economic and social life, peeling back the myths and unearthing the realities of this fascinating civilization. Stay tuned, because the story of the Indus Valley is far from over, and there's still so much more to discover. Speaking of mysteries and manuals, let's take a detour from the grand economics and dive right into the daily grind of the Indus Valley folks. Imagine waking up in one of those well-planned homes, where the morning light streams through strategically placed windows, whispering promises of yet another bustling day. Breakfast might have been a modest affair, likely involving a hearty mix of wheat or barley porridge. Think of it as the ancient precursor to your morning granola, minus the Instagram-worthy presentation. Now, let's talk food. The Indus Valley diet was as diverse as a buffet at a five-star hotel, if that hotel happened to be located smack dab in a fertile river valley. Archaeological finds suggest they cultivated a smorgasbord of grains, including wheat, barley, and millet, alongside legumes like lentils and chickpeas. And while ancient Mesopotamians were busy inventing beer, Indus Valley residents were likely brewing a similar concoction. Because, let's face it, a civilization without a cold one at the end of a long day is a civilization missing out. But wait, there's more. The Indus folks weren't just subsisting on grains and pulses. They had a penchant for fish and perhaps a bit of mutton or goat, although beef was rare, much like it is in parts of the region today. And let's not forget their love affair with spices. Evidence suggests they enjoyed turmeric and ginger, among others, giving their dishes a kick that would make a modern curry chef proud. When it came to fashion, these ancient trendsetters weren't just draping themselves in whatever came to hand. Nope, they were spinning cotton into garments faster than you could say fast fashion. Around 2500 BCE, they were already weaving cotton textiles, a millennium or so before the Egyptians caught on. And here's a nugget for your next cocktail party. The word cotton itself is believed to have derived from the Sanskrit word karpasa. The Indus Valley was all about comfort and function, with their clothing reflecting the climate's demands. Think light and breathable, perfect for those sweltering river valley summers. But don't let the simple attire fool you. When it came to accessorizing, they went all out. Intricate beadwork, often made from materials like carnelian and agate, was their version of bling. These beads weren't just local, they were traded far and wide, making them the must-have accessory for ancient fashionistas across Asia. The Indus people might not have had Instagram, but they knew how to make a statement. Now, let's pivot to what we might call the ancient version of Netflix and chill, board games. Yes, the Indus Valley folks enjoyed a good game night, though it probably didn't involve a bowl of popcorn and a streaming service. Archaeologists have unearthed game pieces and dice from various sites, suggesting that these ancient people were fans of strategy games. Think chess or backgammon, but without the detailed rulebook. Given their penchant for trade and strategy, it's not hard to imagine Indus Valley merchants honing their skills in a friendly game before striking out on the trade routes. And what about the women, you ask? The role of women in the Indus Valley, a subject that invites speculation and debate, largely because the archaeological record is as elusive as deciphering their script. But here's what we do know. The absence of overtly patriarchal structures, like those found in contemporary societies, suggests that women may have enjoyed a relatively egalitarian status. It's plausible that they were involved in various aspects of daily life, from managing households to participating in trade and craft production. Some might even have been priestesses or leaders within their communities, though we lack hard evidence to confirm this. The true beauty of the Indus Valley civilization lies in its simplicity and functionality, qualities that allowed it to thrive for centuries. Yet, the lack of explicit records means we can only paint a picture with broad strokes, leaving much to our imagination. But isn't that part of the allure? The idea that in a world dominated by power and prestige, there existed a society where the lines between work and play, leadership and community, were blurred. A world where the quiet strength of women and the resilience of everyday people were as significant as the bricks that built their cities. As we dig deeper into the day-to-day lives of these ancient people, we find a society that was both advanced and grounded, thriving on a mix of innovation and practicality. From their diet and fashion to their leisure activities and social roles, the Indus Valley civilization was a tapestry of complexity, woven with threads of simplicity. It's a testament to the enduring power of community and collaboration, a story that continues to unfold with each archaeological discovery, waiting to reveal the secrets of a civilization that knew how to live well long before the rest of the world caught on. Stay with me, because as we turn the pages of history, we'll continue to explore the intricate details of the Indus Valley's social fabric, peeling back the layers of myth and reality to uncover the truths hidden beneath. We've only just begun to scratch the surface, and there's so much more to learn from this captivating civilization. So grab your metaphorical trowel and let's keep digging into the past, one fascinating fact at a time. All right, so where were we? Ah, yes, peeling back the layers of the Indus Valley's daily life. But now, let's zoom out and tackle the elephant in the room. What happened to this mighty civilization? Spoiler alert. It wasn't like the ending of a blockbuster movie with explosions and credits rolling. Instead, picture a slow fade to black, the kind that leaves you with more questions than answers. First up on the suspect list, environmental changes. The Indus Valley folks were as at the mercy of Mother Nature as we are when deciding between an umbrella or sunglasses. Around 1800 BCE, the climate started acting up like a teenager who just discovered rebellion. The once dependable monsoon rains became erratic, and the powerful Indus River occasionally forgot its duty to flood those fertile plains. Imagine trying to run a farm when the weather app keeps giving you 50/50 odds. It's like planning a picnic on a day with a chance of rain, except the stakes were a tad higher. The river's erratic behavior wasn't just a hiccup. It meant reduced yields, which translated into food shortages, less trade, and ultimately social stress. No one enjoys a good famine, and when your economy is tied to agriculture, it's a bit like watching your stocks plummet. But this isn't the dramatic fall we're conditioned to expect. It's a slow unraveling, where each missed monsoon nudged society closer to the edge. Now, add to this mix the theory of tectonic shenanigans. Some researchers propose that tectonic shifts might have redirected river courses, leaving once thriving cities high and dry. It's like waking up to find your beachfront property now overlooks a desert. The river that gave life could just as easily take it away by simply deciding to flow elsewhere. These environmental changes would have forced communities to migrate, not in a grand exodus, but in small groups over time, seeking new lands to cultivate and trade routes to navigate. Speaking of migrations, here's where the plot thickens. Enter the Aryans, a group whose arrival has been as hotly debated as the latest celebrity scandal. Some historians suggest they were the new kids on the block around 1500 BCE, bringing with them new languages and cultural practices. But let's debunk the idea of a sudden Aryan invasion sweeping through like a conquering army. Instead, envision a more gradual assimilation, a cultural exchange with the local populations, like neighbors who gradually start borrowing each other's sugar and Netflix accounts. This influx of new people and ideas likely led to a cultural transformation rather than a violent takeover. The Indus script, already on the endangered list, may have fallen out of favor as new languages took the stage. This wasn't a collapse, but a metamorphosis, where the old ways intertwined with the new, creating a tapestry of blended cultures. Yet, despite these shifts, let's not romanticize this transition as a peaceful integration. There were undoubtedly tensions, as there always are when different groups vie for resources and influence, but the real story here is the resilience of human societies. The Indus Valley people didn't disappear. They adapted, evolved, and left traces in the cultural and genetic makeup of the region. So, what does this all mean? The decline of the Indus Valley civilization wasn't a cataclysmic event, but a series of gradual changes, like watching a once bustling party slowly wind down as guests trickle out. This challenges our definition of decline, urging us to see it not as an end, but as a transformation. The cities may have been abandoned, but their legacy lived on in the cultural DNA of future societies. As we wrap up this historical soiree, let's ponder the legacy of the Indus Valley civilization. In a world obsessed with grandeur, they remind us that sometimes the most enduring achievements are those we can't see. Their sophisticated urban planning, egalitarian social structure, and robust trade networks laid a foundation that would influence future generations. Their story is a testament to the power of community and adaptation, proving that history isn't just about the victors or the loudest voices. It's about the quiet resilience of people who knew how to thrive against the odds. And there you have it, folks, a civilization that thrived on subtlety and practicality, whose story continues to intrigue and inspire. As we close the book on the Indus Valley, let's carry forward the lesson that sometimes the greatest legacies are the ones that whisper instead of shout, reminding us of the strength found in unity and the quiet power of human ingenuity. In a cramped Warsaw apartment in 1867, a baby girl named Maria Skłodowska took her first breath, oblivious to the fact that she'd one day change science forever. Now, Warsaw wasn't exactly the easiest place to impress the neighbors back then. The city was under Russian rule, where political oppression was practically a national sport, and economic struggles were as common as pierogi on a Polish dinner table. The Skłodowska family, though rich in intellectual capital, was short on financial clout. They may have had more books than bread, but even so, their household was a breeding ground for future greatness. Maria, or Mania as her family called her, was the youngest of 5 children. Her father, W. Ladislaw, was a physics teacher who brought home more scientific theories than rubles, and her mother, Branislawa, ran a prestigious boarding school for girls. Tragedy struck early when Mania lost her mother to tuberculosis and her eldest sister to typhus, both before she hit her teens. It was the kind of loss that could crush spirits, but if anything, it seemed to stoke Mania's inner fire. Books became her refuge, and education her escape plan. In a world where women were expected to prioritize needlework over Newton, Mania was acing her exams like it was nobody's business. At 15, she graduated from high school with a gold medal, which was about as useful as a chocolate teapot in Russian-occupied Poland. But hey, it was shiny. Back then, the Russians had this lovely idea that Polish schools should churn out compliant, undereducated citizens, but Mania wasn't having any of it. She joined the Floating University, an underground network of classes held in secret to dodge the Russian curriculum that had all the intellectual nourishment of a soggy cabbage. By 1891, Mania had enough of sneaking around and decided it was time to trade in the Warsaw skyline for Paris. She was 24, with a one-way ticket to the Sorbonne, where she'd study math and physics. The plan was simple: learn all the things, get all the degrees, and do it all in a brand new city where she didn't speak the language. Easy, right? Well, not quite. Paris may have been the city of lights, but for Mania, it was also the city of financial darkness. She swapped her name to Marie and her meals for academic papers, living on a diet of bread, butter, and occasional tea. Luxuries like meat were reserved for the elite, or anyone who didn't have to pay Parisian rent. Marie juggled odd jobs to make ends meet. Tutoring was her gig of choice, which didn't exactly pay like a modern-day startup, but it was honest work. Her students were mostly wealthy Parisians who probably couldn't care less about the periodic table, but Marie was as relentless as a Parisian waiter, ignoring your attempt to order in English. She lived in a garret under the eaves, where the rent was low, the view was non-existent, and the temperature was a few degrees above freezing. It was the kind of place that made you question your life choices every time the wind rattled the window panes. Despite these hardships, Marie thrived academically. The Sorbonne had never seen someone quite like her, a woman, a foreigner, and a scientific prodigy who was there to learn, not to find a husband or pass the time until something more appropriate came along. She earned degrees in physics and mathematics, ranking first and second in her classes, respectively. It was during these years that she met her future husband, Pierre Curie, but that's a story for another day. Marie's journey wasn't just about academic achievements. It was about defying the odds stacked against her gender and nationality. She was carving a path through a man's world with nothing more than her wits and an unyielding spirit. Her life was a masterclass in resilience, proving that sometimes the best way to fight systemic oppression is with a head full of dreams and a heart full of courage. But let's not get too romantic here. The path was littered with enough hardships to put a Dickensian orphan to shame. Yet, through it all, Marie Curie remained undeterred, as if she had a secret agreement with the universe. She'd endure its trials, and in return, it would eventually yield its secrets to her. And so it was that Marie Curie found herself defying the odds in Paris, a city that flaunted grandeur on every corner, yet offered her a more humble existence. By 1895, things took a turn, not necessarily for the easier, but certainly for the more interesting. Enter Pierre Curie. He wasn't exactly the dashing knight in shining armor, more like a kindred spirit in a lab coat. They met in a manner fitting for a pair of scientific rebels, through mutual friends who thought they'd make a perfect intellectual match. Turns out, they were onto something. Pierre and Marie clicked like two puzzle pieces, but don't let the romanticized tales fool you. Their union wasn't all candlelit dinners and strolls by the Seine. No, it was more about shared lab benches and bouncing ideas off each other until the wee hours. Pierre, a physicist with a penchant for crystals and magnetism, was already making waves in scientific circles. He was the kind of guy who took his lab work home, both literally and figuratively. When they married in July 1895, their honeymoon was a bicycle tour of the French countryside. Because why not mix a little romance with the elements of velocity and friction? Their wedding gifts included a second-hand bicycle and a whole bunch of scientific equipment. Forget China patterns. These two were setting up a lab. Ah, the lab. Now that's where the myth and the reality diverge faster than light through a prism. Forget the polished, state-of-the-art facilities you might imagine. Instead, picture a drafty old shed behind the School of Physics and Chemistry in Paris. It had all the charm and insulation of a barn, which isn't far off from its actual use before the Curies moved in. The equipment was a hodgepodge of second-hand finds and improvised tools. We're talking about using old kitchen utensils and repurposed furniture because, when you're on the brink of scientific discovery, a little rust never hurt anyone, right? Together, the Curies embarked on groundbreaking research into radioactivity, a term Marie herself coined. It was a field so new it was practically still in diapers. They were inspired by the work of Henry Becquerel, who discovered that uranium salts emitted rays. Marie, with her characteristic zeal, decided to dive deeper. She began by testing every element she could get her hands on, eventually focusing on pitchblende, a mineral richer in uranium than a Parisian cafe is in espressos. In the pursuit of isolating radioactive elements, they faced a Herculean task. Processing tons of pitchblende ore was no walk in the park. It was more like a marathon through quicksand. The Curies toiled away for 4 years, stirring boiling vats of chemicals with makeshift tools in a room that more closely resembled a medieval alchemist's den than a modern lab. The goal, to discover new elements. And boy, did they. In July 1898, they announced the discovery of polonium, named after Marie's homeland, Poland, a nod to her roots, and a subtle act of defiance against the political status quo. But they weren't done. Just 5 months later, they identified radium, a substance so intensely radioactive that it glowed with a pale blue light. These discoveries weren't just academic curiosities. They were the keys to a new understanding of the atomic world. Radium, in particular, would go on to have applications ranging from medical treatments to glow-in-the-dark watch dials, though the latter would later reveal its own dark side. Now, let's poke a few holes in the romantic narrative. Pierre and Marie's partnership is often portrayed as a seamless symphony of minds, but the reality was more discordant. They were equals in curiosity and drive, but not in recognition. The scientific community, with its patriarchal leanings, was more inclined to credit Pierre for their joint work. Marie was often seen as his assistant, despite being the lead researcher. In truth, she was an intellectual force of nature, but the era's gender biases cast a long shadow over her contributions. Their work environment was no picnic either. The conditions were harsh and hazardous, with little consideration for safety. They were exposed to high levels of radiation, unaware of the risks. Radium's glow was mesmerizing, but its effects were insidious. Marie often carried tubes of it in her pockets or stored them in her desk drawer, enchanted by its luminescence. Little did they know, they were dancing with a radioactive devil. The dangers of radiation exposure were a mystery at the time, turning their makeshift lab into a silent minefield. Economically, the Curies weren't exactly rolling in francs. Their discoveries were groundbreaking, but their bank account was more of a pothole than a treasure chest. They refused to patent radium, believing it should be freely available for research. A noble gesture, but one that left them financially strained. They subsisted on Pierre's modest professor's salary and small research grants, proving once again that scientific brilliance doesn't always equate to financial security. The Curie story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of adversity. They were pioneers, not only in their scientific achievements, but in challenging societal norms. Marie, especially, shattered the glass ceiling with a radioactive hammer, paving the way for future generations of female scientists. Yet, as we celebrate their accomplishments, we must also acknowledge the toll it took, the sacrifices, the hardships, and the silent suffering that came hand in hand with their legacy. Their story doesn't end here, of course, but as we leave them amid boiling vats and glowing test tubes, remember that the Curies weren't just discovering new elements. They were redefining what was possible. They were navigating uncharted territory with little more than determination and a dream, proving that sometimes the greatest discoveries come not from comfort and ease, but from the courage to endure and explore the unknown. And in the grand scheme of history, isn't that the kind of legacy worth its weight in radium? And so, as the Curies toiled away in their radioactive Aladdin's cave, the early 1900s rolled in with a mix of opportunity and obstacles that could make or break a scientific soul. Marie Curie was about to find herself on the world stage, not just as a trailblazing scientist, but as a woman who dared to challenge the gender norms of her time. In 1903, Nobel Prize Committee decided to grace the Curies and Henry Becquerel with the Nobel Prize in Physics for their joint work on radioactivity. It was a prestigious honor, yet the path to that accolade was rockier than a mountain goat's morning commute. Initially, the Nobel Committee intended to award the prize to just Pierre and Becquerel. Marie, despite being the driving force behind the research, was nearly left in the shadows, like an afterthought in the annals of scientific history. It took a nudge from Swedish mathematician Magnus Gerster-Middaglöffler, who was an early advocate for women in science, to ensure Marie received her due recognition. He discreetly informed Pierre of the oversight, prompting Pierre to insist that his wife be included. The committee relented, and Marie became the first woman to win a Nobel Prize. But let's not pop the champagne just yet. The gender bias was more than just a clerical error. It was a systemic issue that Marie would continue to battle. Winning the Nobel Prize was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it catapulted the Curies into the scientific stratosphere, bringing fame, recognition, and a tidy sum of 70,000 francs, enough to finally consider upgrading their makeshift lab. But on the other hand, it thrust Marie into the harsh glare of public scrutiny. The newspapers had a field day, with headlines highlighting her nationality and gender. Marie was Polish and a woman, two characteristics that, according to the chauvinistic standards of the time, were supposed to be liabilities, not assets. Despite the Nobel's glitz, Marie wasn't exactly rolling in wealth. The French government didn't rush to shower her with gold coins or research grants. Funding was still tight, and they continued to work under less than ideal conditions. The glow of radium may have been captivating, but it didn't pay the bills. The Curies' financial prudence, or stubbornness, depending on how you look at it, made them refuse to patent their discoveries. They believed in the free exchange of scientific knowledge, a noble ideal that kept their pockets lighter than a helium balloon. As if juggling fame and finances wasn't enough, Marie faced another uphill battle, gaining acceptance in the French Academy of Sciences. In 1911, she applied for membership to this bastion of male intellectuals, but her application was rejected. The Academy had never admitted a woman, and they weren't about to start with a foreigner, even one with 2 Nobel Prizes. The vote was close, just one short of her favor, but the decision was a glaring reminder of the glass ceiling she was still desperately trying to shatter. But Marie wasn't one to wallow in self-pity. Instead, she doubled down on her research, focusing on the medical applications of radium, particularly in cancer treatment. Her work laid the foundation for radiotherapy, a legacy that continues to save lives today. She was proving, once again, that while society could deny her a seat at their table, they couldn't deny the impact of her work. And speaking of impact, let's not forget her second Nobel Prize in 1911, this time in chemistry for her discovery of radium and polonium. She became the first person, male or female, to win 2 Nobels in different sciences, a feat that even the most ambitious overachievers can only dream of. Yet, this victory came with its own set of challenges. The media, with all the subtlety of a bull in a china shop, was more interested in her personal life than her scientific achievements. Her affair with physicist Paul Langevin, who was married at the time, became fodder for scandal sheets. The press painted her as a homewrecker, conveniently ignoring her monumental contributions to science. As Marie weathered these storms, she remained committed to her work, often working long hours despite the personal and professional pressures. The exhaustion was real, but so was her unyielding determination. She'd often retreat to her work as a form of solace, immersing herself in research when the world outside became too loud. Her ability to focus on the bigger picture, despite the chaos, was nothing short of remarkable. Through all this, it's crucial to remember that Marie's achievements, while groundbreaking, weren't solitary endeavors. Scientific discovery, as romantic as the lone genius narrative might be, is rarely the work of a single individual. Marie's successes were bolstered by collaborations with Pierre, Becquerel, and many others who contributed to her research. Even the discovery of radium and polonium was a team effort, reliant on the labor of assistants and colleagues who helped process the tons of pitch-blende ore. Marie Curie's story is a testament to the complexities of human achievement. She was a pioneer, yes, but she was also a human being navigating a world that wasn't quite ready for her brilliance. Her legacy is a reminder that greatness often requires resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. As we leave this chapter of her life, remember that Marie wasn't just a woman of science. She was a woman of substance, courage, and conviction, qualities that made her as luminous as the radium she studied. But this isn't the end of her journey, and as history would have it, there are still more pages to turn in the saga of Marie Curie. As we segue from the luminous legacy of Marie Curie, imagine her standing at a crossroads, poised to pivot from the theoretical to the practical during one of history's most tumultuous times, World War I. The world was embroiled in chaos, but Marie, ever the pragmatist, saw an opportunity to apply her scientific discoveries in ways that would make even the most skeptical military commanders sit up and take notice. With the outbreak of war in 1914, Marie Curie shifted gears faster than you can say, Eureka. She turned her attention from the glow of radium to the glow of X-ray images, recognizing that her work could quite literally save lives on the battlefield. Enter the Little Curies, a fleet of mobile X-ray units she helped develop, which were designed to bring radiological services directly to the wounded soldiers. These portable machines were about as cutting-edge as it got during the Great War, combining the latest in scientific innovation with the practicality of a traveling circus. But let's not gloss over the logistical nightmare this endeavor entailed. First, Marie had to overcome the mind-boggling challenge of funding. Think of it as a Kickstarter campaign without the internet or even reliable postage. She needed to raise money to build these mobile units and train personnel, which meant appealing to the French government and private donors. We're talking about a time when asking for money wasn't as simple as a GoFundMe link. It involved navigating a bureaucratic labyrinth that would make even Kafka cringe. Then there was the small matter of learning to drive. Yes, Marie Curie, the two-time Nobel laureate, was behind the wheel of these ambulances, blazing a trail across the French countryside. Picture this, a woman in her mid-40s, not exactly the demographic for Formula One, taking driving lessons so she could personally deliver her mobile X-rays to the front. It was a sight to behold, and one that defied the gender norms of the early 20th century with every turn of the wheel. The Little Curies weren't just a technical challenge. They were a symbol of Marie's tenacity and adaptability. Each unit was equipped with a dynamo-powered X-ray machine, powered by the vehicle's engine, and staffed by a radiologist and a driver, often one and the same. Marie trained over 150 women to operate these machines, turning them into a new breed of medical technicians. These women, much like Marie herself, were pioneers, stepping into roles that society hadn't quite prepared them for. Economically, the project was a tightrope walk. The cost of each mobile unit was around 10,000 francs, a figure that could buy you a small estate or a lifetime supply of croissants. Yet, despite the financial strain, Marie was relentless in her pursuit. She saw the transformative power of X-ray technology in diagnosing fractures and locating shrapnel, reducing the need for exploratory surgeries that were as risky as they were common in those days. Now, let's talk radium. It's no secret that Marie had a bit of a love affair with the element, but getting her hands on it during wartime was a different story. Radium was the diamond of the periodic table, both in its rarity and its price tag. A single gram cost around 100,000 francs, which was enough to make even the most generous donors balk. Marie embarked on a fundraising mission that would rival any modern-day charity gala. She reached out to wealthy American women, leveraging her fame and scientific standing to secure the funds needed to purchase radium for medical research. It was a testament to her persuasive powers that she succeeded in acquiring the precious element, despite the astronomical costs. Her determination to integrate radium into medical treatments wasn't just about the science. It was a personal crusade against the limitations of her time. Marie's vision extended beyond the battlefield, laying the groundwork for the future of oncology. Her work during the war wasn't just a footnote in her illustrious career. It was a turning point that demonstrated her ability to adapt her scientific expertise to meet the immediate needs of society. Of course, the romanticized version of Marie Curie's wartime contributions often glosses over the harsh realities she faced. She wasn't just a scientist. She was a widow, a mother, and a woman battling societal expectations at every turn. Her husband, Pierre, had tragically died in 1906, leaving her to navigate this new chapter of her life alone. Yet she persisted, driven by a sense of duty to humanity and an unwavering belief in the power of science to heal. Her efforts weren't met with universal applause. Many in the French medical community were skeptical, if not outright dismissive, of her mobile X-ray units. It took time, perseverance, and undeniable results to convince them of their value. But Marie was no stranger to skepticism. She'd spent her entire career proving naysayers wrong, one discovery at a time. By the end of the war, over 1 million soldiers had been X-rayed by the little Curies, and Marie's contributions were finally recognized beyond the confines of the laboratory. Her work had not only saved countless lives, but also reshaped the medical landscape, paving the way for future innovations in diagnostic imaging. In the grand tapestry of history, Marie Curie's wartime efforts are a vivid thread of ingenuity and resilience. She wasn't just a scientist locked away in a lab. She was a force of nature, driving change with the same intensity she applied to her research. Her story during World War I is a testament to the power of adaptability, reminding us that sometimes the greatest discoveries are those that directly impact the world around us. And as we leave Marie Curie amid the rumble of ambulances and the whir of X-ray machines, remember that her journey was far from over. The war may have ended, but her fight for scientific progress and recognition continued, setting the stage for the next chapter in her extraordinary life. As the echoes of World War I faded and the world tried to regain its footing, Marie Curie found herself at yet another crossroads. Her wartime contributions had cemented her reputation as a scientific powerhouse, but this was no time for resting on laurels. With the war behind her, Marie turned her attention to a new chapter in her scientific journey, the establishment of the Radium Institute in 1914, right before the war threw the world into chaos. You could say the timing wasn't ideal, but then again, when had Marie's life ever been a smooth ride? The Radium Institute, later known as the Curie Institute, was a testament to Marie's relentless pursuit of scientific advancement. It was founded with the goal of continuing research into radioactivity and exploring its medical applications. Picture a place where science and medicine could tango, and you'd have a pretty good idea of what she envisioned. The Institute became a beacon for researchers across the globe, drawing in talent like moths to a radioactive flame. Marie's establishment of this research hub in Paris was as much an act of defiance as it was dedication, a reminder to the world that scientific progress wouldn't be derailed by war or societal expectations. The funding, however, was another story. Securing financial support was like wrangling cats, with Marie having to navigate a maze of bureaucratic red tape and diplomatic niceties. She was, after all, a foreigner in France, and while her scientific contributions were undeniable, her status as a Polish immigrant was never far from the minds of those holding the purse strings. Yet, through sheer force of will and her undeniable clout, she managed to secure the necessary funds. The Institute became operational in the early 1920s, serving as both a research facility and a training ground for the next generation of scientists. It was here that Marie's dual passion for research and education blossomed, and the Institute quickly became a hotbed for groundbreaking discoveries. But let's not sugarcoat it. Marie was no saint. The image of her as the selfless, Mara-like figure is as misleading as a map drawn by a pirate. She was ambitious, driven, and fiercely protective of her work. Her dedication to science was absolute, but it often came at the expense of personal relationships and her own well-being. She was a complex character, not just the benevolent figurehead her legend sometimes paints her to be. She could be as stubborn as a mule on steroids, and her single-minded focus often meant that those around her had to keep up or get left in the radioactive dust. Her health, unfortunately, was another casualty of her relentless pursuit of knowledge. The very elements she had dedicated her life to studying were also slowly sapping it away. By the late 1920s, Marie's health began to decline noticeably. The effects of prolonged radiation exposure, which were about as subtle as a sledgehammer, had started to take their toll. She suffered from cataracts, likely due to the radiation, and her overall health was deteriorating. But in true Curie fashion, she soldiered on, driven by the knowledge that her work could change the world. Marie Curie's later years were a paradox of triumph and tragedy. She continued to push the boundaries of science, even as her body betrayed her. The Radium Institute flourished under her guidance, producing a new generation of scientists who would carry the torch of her work far beyond her lifetime. Yet, the very success she cultivated was a stark reminder of the personal costs she had paid. Her story is a cautionary tale about the hidden dangers lurking behind even the most groundbreaking discoveries. As we reflect on Marie Curie's legacy, it's easy to get swept up in the romanticism of her achievements. Here was a woman who won not one, but 2 Nobel Prizes in different sciences. She broke barriers, shattered ceilings, and did it all with a level of perseverance that would make a marathon runner blush. But beyond the accolades and achievements, Marie's story is a sobering reminder of the challenges that still face women in STEM fields today. Her struggles for recognition, funding, and equality echo in the halls of academia, even now, over a century later. Marie Curie's life is a testament to the power of determination and intellect, yet it also serves as a poignant reminder of the societal structures that still need dismantling. The roadblocks she faced aren't relics of the past. They're very much alive in the present. Women in STEM continue to battle for their place at the table, often having to shout to be heard over the din of their male counterparts. The glass ceiling may have been cracked by pioneers like Marie, but it's far from shattered. In the end, Marie Curie's legacy is as complex and multifaceted as the elements she studied. She was a woman of extraordinary intellect and ambition, whose contributions to science changed the course of history. But she was also a human being, grappling with the realities of her time and the limitations imposed upon her by society. Her story is a blend of romance and reality, inspiration and caution, triumph and tragedy. As we close the chapter on Marie Curie, let's remember her not just for the luminous discoveries and the accolades, but for the indomitable spirit that drove her to break barriers and challenge conventions. Her life was a masterclass in perseverance, a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge is a journey fraught with challenges, but also one that holds the promise of profound impact. Marie Curie was many things: a scientist, a mother, a pioneer. But above all, she was a testament to the power of resilience in the face of adversity. And in a world still grappling with its own set of challenges, her story remains as relevant as ever. 14th century, Florence wasn't just any old city. It was the Renaissance version of Silicon Valley, minus the tech bros and overpriced avocado toast. Instead, it was bustling with merchants, artists, and scholars, all trying to outdo each other in a frenzy of creativity and commerce. But behind all the frescoes and sculptures, there lurked a group of power players who were more about the Benjamins than the brushstrokes. Say hello to the Medici family, original influencers of the Renaissance. These guys weren't just wealthy, they practically invented the concept of money making money, thanks to their banking empire that spanned much of Europe. Now, don't let the romanticized art history books fool you. This wasn't purely a cultural crusade. The Medici bankrolled the Renaissance with a cunning blend of financial acumen and opportunistic flair. Picture Cosimo de' Medici, the family patriarch, as a modern venture capitalist, except instead of funding the next big app, he was shelling out florins to bankroll artists like Donatello and Brunelleschi. Why? Well, let's just say it was part genuine love for the arts and part strategic maneuver to keep the family's reputation as polished as Michelangelo's David. In the 1430, Cosimo used his wealth to effectively control Florence's political landscape, leveraging his banking empire to influence decisions and keep his rivals in check. It was a time when Florence was a republic in name, but more of a Medici monarchy in practice. With an annual banking revenue that would make modern hedge funds blush, the Medici's financial clout allowed them to become the ultimate patrons of the arts. Cosimo wasn't just collecting a bunch of pretty paintings. He was curating a cultural legacy that would cement his family's name in history. And let's face it, if you've got the cash, why settle for a humble family crest when you can have an entire cultural movement named after you? The economic boom in Florence was fueled by more than just the Medici Bank. The city was strategically located on trade routes, making it a hub for wool and luxury textiles. But here's the kicker. Florence's currency, the florin, became the de facto currency for international trade. Talk about a power move. This little gold coin was the 14th century version of Bitcoin, except far more stable and universally accepted. By the late 1400, over 350 European banks were using the florin for transactions. It was like Florence had monetized its artistic flair and was laughing all the way to, well, their own banks. But let's not sugarcoat things. Florence's golden age wasn't all about marble statues and poetic sonnets. The city was also a hotbed of political intrigue and backstabbing. Think Game of Thrones, but with more frescoes and fewer dragons. The Medici family knew that to maintain their grip on power, they had to play the political game as shrewdly as they managed their financial empire. This meant making and breaking alliances, funding strategic marriages, and occasionally orchestrating the odd assassination when diplomacy failed. Hey, no one said the Renaissance was all sunshine and Da Vinci. In essence, the Medici were the PR masterminds of the Renaissance. They knew that by funding art and architecture, they could distract from their more unsavory dealings and present themselves as paragons of culture and civility. It was a classic case of art as propaganda, a strategy that's been recycled throughout history. While they were busy commissioning chapels and sponsoring scholars, they were also making sure their less-than-angelic activities were neatly swept under the Florentine rug. So, was the Renaissance in Florence truly a rebirth of culture and intellect, or just a savvy exercise in image management by some very wealthy bankers? The answer, as with most things in history, is a bit of both. Sure, the Medici had their hands in some questionable pies, but without their patronage, the world might have missed out on some of its most iconic works of art and architecture. They were visionaries and opportunists, saints and sinners, patrons and power brokers, all rolled into one fabulously wealthy package. And isn't that just the kind of paradox that makes history so endlessly fascinating? As much as the Medici were the puppet masters of Florence's cultural renaissance, they needed a cast of characters to bring their grand vision to life. Enter the Renaissance artists, the original influencers before the term was hijacked by social media. Let's start with the man, the myth, the legend, Leonardo da Vinci. Now, here's a guy who could have made a killing on Kickstarter. Born in 1452, Leonardo was a polymath whose talents were as diverse as his imagination was boundless. But don't let the romanticized image of the brooding genius fool you. Leonardo was also a guy with a laundry list of unfinished projects and a knack for procrastination that would make a college student proud. Leonardo's Mona Lisa, arguably the most famous painting in the world, didn't just pop out of thin air. It was a commission from Francesco del Giocondo, a wealthy Florentine silk merchant. Yet, despite the initial purpose of the painting, Leo carried it with him across Europe for years, possibly tweaking it on and off like an artist never quite satisfied with his masterpiece. He finally completed it after about 4 years of work, which, let's admit, is a pretty hefty timeline for a portrait. But when you're Leonardo, you're not just painting a face, you're capturing the essence of human mystery. Plus, he needed something to show King Francis I of France in 1516 when he moved to Amboise, essentially becoming the royal court's resident thinker and tinkerer. Now, while Leonardo was busy being the quintessential Renaissance man, Michelangelo was carving his own niche, literally. Michelangelo Buonarroti, born in 1475, had a penchant for marble like no other. His David, a 17-foot testament to human form and confidence, wasn't just a statue, it was a political statement. Commissioned in 1501 by the overseers of the Office of Works of the Duomo, it was meant to symbolize Florence's resistance against larger, more powerful rivals. And at a cool 400 ducats, Michelangelo's fee was nothing to sneeze at, about the cost of a decent house in Florence at the time. Not bad for a guy who, legend has it, carved his name into the sash across the Virgin Mary's chest in his Pieta, just to ensure everyone knew who crafted such a masterpiece. While these titans of art loom large in our minds today, life wasn't all roses and frescoes. For one, both Leonardo and Michelangelo had to hustle for their commissions, often at the mercy of patrons who were more interested in their own glory than the artist's financial stability. Leonardo, for example, spent nearly 17 years at the Milanese court of Ludovico Sforza, where he was paid to plan everything from military fortifications to elaborate pageants. Michelangelo, on the other hand, found himself at the beck and call of Pope Julius Roman II, whose commission for the Sistine Chapel ceiling was as much about papal prestige as it was about divine inspiration. This brings us to the Sistine Chapel, a project so monumental that it deserves its own reality show. Michelangelo wasn't thrilled about the job. He considered himself a sculptor, not a painter. But when the Pope insists, you don't exactly ghost him. So Michelangelo spent 4 grueling years perched on scaffolding, painting over 5,000 square feet of ceiling. The result? A breathtaking masterpiece that continues to draw millions of tourists each year. But back in 1512, Michelangelo was more likely to be found grumbling about his sore neck and lack of payment than basking in artistic glory. Let's talk numbers for a second. The Sistine Chapel cost Pope Julius Roman II around 3,000 ducats, a sum equivalent to more than $500,000 today. Yet Michelangelo's personal cut was far less than that, revealing the gritty truth. Artists of the Renaissance were often more like glorified freelancers, negotiating fees and deadlines with patrons who held the financial upper hand. What's more, Michelangelo's letters reveal a man often stressed about money, frequently writing to his family about the need to save and invest wisely. Hardly the image of the carefree genius we often imagine. And then there's the case of Raphael, the third giant of Renaissance art, who managed to balance talent and temperament with the grace of a diplomat. Raphael's frescoes in the Vatican, particularly the School of Athens, are lauded for their harmony and clarity. But while Raphael's works were celebrated in his lifetime, he also had to navigate the perilous waters of Vatican politics, which were as murky as the Tiber. Raphael, who died young at 37, reportedly from a fever exacerbated by a night of excessive indulgence, left behind a legacy of art that rivaled his contemporaries. His ability to charm patrons and fellow artists alike was perhaps his greatest asset, proving that sometimes being a people person can be just as valuable as artistic talent. So, were these artists tortured geniuses or savvy operators? The answer lies somewhere in between. The Renaissance was a time when creativity was both a passion and a profession, and artists were expected to juggle inspiration with the harsh realities of their era. They had to be as skilled with a contract as they were with a chisel or a brush. While their masterpieces continue to enchant us, it's crucial to remember the world they navigated, one filled with political strife, economic pressures, and the ever-present need to secure the next commission. In essence, the Renaissance artists were pioneers in the art of survival, as adept at promoting themselves as they were at creating the works that would immortalize them. They were not just creators of beauty, but also shrewd negotiators, balancing the demands of their patrons with their own artistic visions. The Medici may have bankrolled the Renaissance, but it was artists like Leonardo, Michelangelo, and Raphael who brought it to life, one brushstroke at a time. And isn't it fitting that their most enduring legacy is a testament to both the power of creativity and the intricacies of human ambition? As the Renaissance artists left their indelible marks on the world, another kind of genius was taking shape, one that would illuminate the heavens and challenge the very fabric of human understanding. Welcome to the scientific revolution, where curiosity collided with the cosmos, and publish or perish wasn't just a catchy mantra. It could mean your theories literally got you toasted. Let's dive into the world of Nicolaus Copernicus, the man who had the audacity to suggest that maybe, just maybe, Earth wasn't the center of the universe. Born in 1473 in what is now Poland, Copernicus was a mathematician and astronomer whose heliocentric theory flipped the script on cosmic order. His seminal work, De Revolutionibus Orbium Celestium on the revolutions of the celestial spheres, published in 1543, posited that the sun, not Earth, was at the center of the universe. Talk about a plot twist. This theory was the astronomical equivalent of Can I interrupting Taylor Swift at the VMAs. It shocked, it outraged, and it changed the game. What many don't realize is that Copernicus's revolutionary ideas didn't explode onto the scene overnight. He spent decades quietly refining his theories while holding down a day job as a canon in a cathedral. Yep, that's right. Our groundbreaking astronomer was also a cleric. Irony, thy name is history. Copernicus was cautious, perhaps knowing that his ideas were about as welcome as a skunk at a garden party in the conservative circles of the time. He finally published his magnum opus in the year of his death, which seems less like procrastination and more like strategic timing. After all, it's hard to be persecuted when you're already 6 feet under. Then came Galileo Galilei, the rock star of Renaissance science. Born in 1564 in Pisa, Italy, he was a man who looked at the stars and saw a universe of possibilities, or perhaps just a really expensive light show. Galileo didn't invent the telescope, but he was the first to use it to systematically observe the heavens. In 1609, when he pointed his improved version of the telescope skyward, the universe suddenly seemed a lot bigger and a lot more complicated. Galileo observed the moons of Jupiter, the phases of Venus, and the rugged surface of our own moon, all of which supported the heliocentric model. His 1610 publication, Sidereus Nuncius Starry Messenger, was the celestial equivalent of a tabloid exposé, revealing the scandalous truth that the heavens weren't the perfect, unchanging realm the Church had long taught. His observations were so compelling that they caused a stir more potent than a double espresso. But here's the catch. Galileo's discoveries didn't just make waves, they made enemies. The Church, which had long championed the geocentric model, wasn't thrilled with the notion that humanity wasn't the cosmic headliner. In 1633, Galileo was hauled before the Roman Inquisition, a trial that would make modern courtroom dramas look like a walk in the park. Accused of heresy, he was forced to recant his support for heliocentrism. Legend has it that after his recantation, he muttered "Epos si muove," and yet it moves, a phrase as defiant as it is poignant. Whether he actually said it or not, the sentiment remains a testament to the enduring spirit of inquiry. Galileo spent the rest of his days under house arrest, which sounds like a raw deal until you realize he continued to write and conduct experiments, effectively turning house arrest into a surprisingly productive sabbatical. The irony was that while he was confined, his ideas roamed free, eventually reshaping our understanding of the universe. Let's not forget Johannes Kepler, the celestial mechanic who provided the mathematical backbone for the heliocentric model. Born in 1571 in the Holy Roman Empire, Kepler was a man whose life was as tumultuous as the orbits he studied. Kepler's laws of planetary motion, which described the elliptical orbits of planets, were a revelation. His work provided the precision Copernicus's model lacked and set the stage for Newton's theory of gravitation. Kepler was a bit of an odd duck, caught between the mystical and the scientific. He believed in astrology and harmonic proportions, yet his calculations were rigorous and groundbreaking. His personal life was equally dramatic, involving a witch trial. His own mother was accused of witchcraft, and a series of professional setbacks. Despite it all, Kepler persisted, crafting a legacy that would influence generations of astronomers. Now, let's throw some numbers into this cosmic cocktail. Galileo's telescope magnified objects up to 20 times their actual size, a feat that cost him around 1,000 scudi, equivalent to roughly $100,000 today. That's a hefty sum for a gadget, but when your purchase changes humanity's view of the universe, it's money well spent. Meanwhile, Kepler's Astronomia Nova New Astronomy, published in 1609, took him over 8 arduous years to complete, but it provided crucial evidence for the heliocentric model. Of course, the real drama was the Church's reaction to these astronomical upstarts. The Catholic Church's grip on intellectual discourse was like a medieval vice, and any challenge to their cosmic narrative was met with fervor. The infamous Index Librorum Prohibitorum, a list of prohibited books, was their way of saying, read at your own risk. Copernicus's work was placed on this list in 1616, and it would take nearly 200 years before the Church officially accepted heliocentrism. Talk about holding a grudge. In summary, the scientific revolution was a time of extraordinary discovery and perilous risk. It was an era when questioning the status quo could earn you a place in the annals of history, or a cell in the dungeons of the Inquisition. Copernicus, Galileo, and Kepler were not just scientists. They were rebels with a cause, challenging the cosmic narrative and facing down the wrath of an institution that preferred its universe neat, without any heliocentric garnish. As we wrap up this chapter of cosmic rebellion, remember this: the universe is vast, mysterious, and often indifferent to human beliefs. Yet, it's these very qualities that inspire us to explore, to question, and to dream. The scientific revolution was not just about the stars, but about the human spirit's unyielding desire to understand, to push boundaries, and to seek truth, even when it's inconvenient or downright dangerous. And isn't that the kind of audacity that makes history so thrilling? Stay tuned as we continue this journey, delving deeper into the Renaissance and its reverberations across time. As we continue our journey through the Renaissance, let's swap our telescope for a microscope and zoom in on the political landscape of Europe, a scene as colorful and chaotic as any fresco ever painted. This was a time when kingdoms were playing musical thrones, and the rules were as fluid as a painter's palette. The Renaissance didn't just birth great art and science. It also gave rise to something a bit less glamorous, but equally transformative: the nation-state. Before this period, much of Europe was a patchwork quilt of feudal fiefdoms, where local lords held sway like miniature monarchs. But as the Renaissance unfolded, these fragmented lands began to coalesce into more centralized entities, setting the stage for the modern countries we know today. It was like watching a jigsaw puzzle slowly reveal a picture, except the pieces were people, and the stakes were life and death. Take France, for instance. In the late 15th century, King Louis Roman XI, known charmingly as the Universal Spider for his web of political intrigue, was busy consolidating power, weaving together a stronger, more centralized state. By the time his successor, Charles Roman VIII, came into power, France was poised to become a major player on the European stage. Charles, not content with merely running a tighter ship at home, decided to try his luck in Italy. His 1494 invasion kicked off a series of Italian wars that would drag on for decades, proving that Renaissance politics were as much about conquest as they were about culture. War, after all, was the ultimate high-stakes game of chess, and Italy was the board. Then there's England, where the War of the Roses, a family feud that made reality TV look tame, finally wrapped up in 1487. Henry Roman VII, the victor, established the Tudor dynasty and began the process of centralizing power. This move wasn't just about tightening his grip on the throne. It was about creating a more efficient state that could stand toe-to-toe with its continental rivals. And while Henry's policies might not be as celebrated as a Michelangelo sculpture, they were pivotal in shaping the England that would, in a few centuries, rule an empire upon which the sun never set. But let's not forget about Spain, a nation undergoing its own dramatic transformation. The marriage of Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile in 1469 was more than a union of two royals. It was a merger of two powerful kingdoms, paving the way for a unified Spanish nation. And they didn't stop there. Ferdinand and Isabella were the power couple of the Renaissance, launching the Reconquista to reclaim territory from the Moors and funding a little-known explorer named Christopher Columbus. Yes, the same Columbus who, in 1492, stumbled upon the Americas while searching for a new route to Asia, a discovery that would have profound consequences for centuries to come. Let's pause here for a reality check. The rise of these nation-states didn't mean peace and prosperity for all. Far from it. Consolidating power often involved ruthless tactics, heavy taxation, and the occasional war or two, or three, but who's counting? It was a time when the sword was mightier than the pen, and diplomacy often took a backseat to brute force. The Renaissance may have been a cultural rebirth, but it was also an era of significant bloodshed and upheaval. Now, let's put on our myth-busting hats. The Renaissance is often romanticized as a time of enlightenment and progress, but the reality was a bit messier. While the Medici were busy patronizing the arts in Florence and Leonardo was sketching flying machines, Europe was embroiled in conflicts that would set the stage for future wars. The 30 Years' War, which erupted in 1618, was a direct descendant of the religious and political tensions that simmered during the Renaissance. It was as if the Renaissance had packed a Pandora's box of issues, left it on Europe's doorstep, and rang the bell. The Protestant Reformation, another Renaissance offspring, was like tossing a match into a powder keg. Martin Luther's 95 Theses in 1517 were the spark that ignited religious upheaval across Europe, challenging the Catholic Church's monopoly on faith and power. It was a bold move, akin to calling out a giant on social media. Except, instead of Twitter trolls, you had to worry about inquisitions and excommunications. The Reformation fractured Christendom, leading to wars of religion that would scar the continent for over a century. But let's get back to the economics for a minute, because money made the Renaissance world go round, literally. As trade routes expanded and commerce flourished, the old feudal order found itself on shaky ground. Mercantilism emerged, with nation-states eager to fill their coffers with gold and silver. The spice trade, driven by the demand for exotic flavors and riches, was the 16th century equivalent of a tech IPO, a high-risk venture with the potential for immense profit. In this bustling marketplace, the bourgeoisie, the rising middle class, began to flex their financial muscles. No longer content to be mere cogs in the feudal machine, these merchants and bankers became vital players in the political arena. Their wealth and influence grew, often rivaling that of the nobility. It was a precursor to the modern capitalist society, where money often speaks louder than titles. As we journey through this era of transformation, it's crucial to recognize that the Renaissance was both a time of profound beauty and brutal reality. It was a period when human potential seemed limitless, yet human nature revealed its darker side. The art and science that captured the imagination were paralleled by political machinations and social upheaval. So, was the Renaissance a genuine revolution, or just a remix of old power structures dressed in new clothes? The answer is a bit of both. It was a time when the past and future colluded, when ancient traditions met innovative ideas, and when ambition was both a creative force and a destructive impulse. And isn't that duality what makes history so endlessly captivating? As we leave this chapter, remember that the Renaissance was not just a golden age of art and intellect, but a complex tapestry of human experience. It was a time of transition, a bridge between medieval and modern worlds. And like any bridge worth its weight in marble or gold, it was built on both firm foundations and precarious precipices. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into this intricate era, exploring the reverberations of the Renaissance and the roads it paved for the centuries to come. As we cross the bridge from the Renaissance to modern Europe, it's time to ask, did the Renaissance really deserve its glittering reputation, or was it more like a well-orchestrated PR campaign? Spoiler alert, it's a bit of both. Let's start by acknowledging the Renaissance's undeniable achievements. This was the era that gave us Leonardo's enigmatic smile and Michelangelo's muscular marble masterpiece, David, both of which remain cultural icons centuries later. But beneath the polished veneer of art and architecture lay a bedrock of economic ambition and political maneuvering that was as gritty as a painter's palette. First things first, let's unpack the myth of the Renaissance as a golden age. Sure, it was a period of extraordinary artistic and intellectual flourishing, but it was also a time when Europe was more of a chaotic marsh pit than a serene gallery opening. The Medici and their ilk weren't just art patrons. They were shrewd operators using culture as a smokescreen for power plays. They knew that sponsoring the arts could distract from their more nefarious activities, like tax evasion on a grand scale. With the Medici bank rolling in cash, Florence became a canvas for artists. But the truth is, art wasn't just about aesthetics. It was a currency of influence. In a way, the Renaissance was the ultimate networking event. If you wanted to get ahead, you needed a patron, and patrons needed artists to showcase their wealth and taste. It was a symbiotic relationship that, while romanticized today, was often more transactional than inspirational. Artists like Raphael and Titian churned out commissions like a Renaissance assembly line, each piece a testament to the patron's prestige rather than the artist's creative freedom. Now, fast forward to the scientific revolution. The Renaissance had set the stage, but it was thinkers like Copernicus, Galileo, and Kepler who really stole the spotlight with their cosmic revelations. The heliocentric model wasn't just an astronomical theory. It was a paradigm shift that challenged the Church's authority. The Church, which had long held the monopoly on celestial explanations, was suddenly facing competition. It was like Blockbuster realizing Netflix was here to stay. Science was no longer just a scholarly pursuit. It was becoming a cornerstone of modernity. But let's not forget, these pioneers were often experimenting in the shadows, wary of persecution. Galileo's house arrest was less a punishment and more a testament to the radical nature of his ideas. Economically, the Renaissance was a bit like a financial Renaissance fair. Mercantilism was on the rise, and the spice trade was the Bitcoin of its day, promising untold riches to those bold enough to invest. This burgeoning capitalism laid the groundwork for the modern economic systems we know today. Yet it also sowed the seeds of inequality, as wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, leaving peasants to toil in fields and factories. The bourgeoisie, a new class of wealthy merchants and bankers, began to outshine the old nobility, proving that money, not just birthright, was the ticket to power. Socially, the Renaissance was both a rebirth and a reckoning. It was an age of exploration, but also exploitation. Columbus's voyages, funded by Spain's power couple Ferdinand and Isabella, opened new worlds, but also heralded an era of colonization that would decimate indigenous populations. The Renaissance was a time of humanist ideals, yet these ideals were often limited to a select few. Women, for example, were largely excluded from the intellectual and artistic circles that defined the era. The few women who did break through, like Sophonisba Anguissola and Artemisia Gentileschi, were exceptions rather than the rule. Politically, the rise of the nation-state was both a unifying force and a cause of conflict. The consolidation of power meant more stability, but it also led to wars that were as frequent as art exhibitions. The Italian Wars, the Habsburg-Valois rivalry, the Protestant Reformation, all were part of a turbulent tapestry that was as intricate as any Renaissance painting. The Reformation, sparked by Martin Luther's defiance, was a game-changer, challenging the Catholic Church's chokehold on spiritual life and paving the way for religious pluralism. So, was the Renaissance truly a rebirth? In many ways, yes. It revitalized art, science, and thought, laying the groundwork for the Enlightenment and the modern world. But it was also a time of contradictions, where progress was often built on a foundation of inequality and conflict. The Renaissance was less a phoenix rising from the ashes and more a chameleon, adapting and evolving in response to the complex challenges of its time. In the end, the Renaissance's legacy is a testament to the dual nature of human endeavor, the capacity for both creation and destruction. It was a time when humanity dared to reach for the stars, even as it stumbled over its own shadows. As we reflect on this era, let's appreciate not just the art and ideas it produced, but also the tumultuous context in which they emerged. The Renaissance was a masterpiece in progress, full of beauty and blemish, much like history itself. So, as we close this chapter, let's carry forward the lessons of the past, balancing the romantic with the real, and continue to question, to create, and to challenge the status quo. And isn't that the true spirit of the Renaissance? In the bustling chaos of ancient Rome, where gladiators were the reality stars and togas the fashion statement of choice, a rather unglamorous yet crucial issue loomed large: water, or rather, the lack thereof. Picture a sprawling city, its population growing faster than a breadline at a free banquet, but with no plumbing to speak of. Enter the Roman aqueducts, not as a stroke of genius from the gods, but as a desperate response to a very earthly problem. Let's rewind to 312 BCE, the year that marked the birth of Rome's first aqueduct, the Aqueducts. Now, if you're imagining legions of engineers sketching blueprints with quills and compasses, slow your roll. This was a time when the Romans were still figuring out whether a toga was supposed to have sleeves. But necessity, dear friends, is the mother of invention, and Rome's necessity was as pressing as a senator's ego. The city was thirsty, literally. Clean water was about as common as a calm Roman Senate meeting, and the Tiber River, while conveniently located, wasn't winning any awards for purity. Enter Appius Claudius Caecus, the man with a plan, or at least, a pressing political agenda. Appius was a Roman censor, a role that combined the duties of a census-taker, public works director, and moral watchdog. Imagine being a mix of city planner and nosy neighbor, an odd combination, but it worked. Appius not only wanted to make a splash with his term in office, but he also needed to secure his legacy. And what better way than to provide Rome with a reliable water supply? Thus, the Aqueducts was born, stretching a modest 4 kilometers, or about 2 miles for those who measure in non-metric. It was mostly underground, not out of modesty, but because it was easier to construct without having to constantly battle gravity and the elements. Now, let's talk engineering. The Romans didn't invent the aqueduct, but boy did they perfect it. Their secret sauce, the gradient. They mastered the art of creating a steady, gentle slope over long distances. Think of it as the ultimate game of liquid plinko, where water, not a tiny disk, needed to reach its destination. The Aqueducts' descent was barely perceptible, about 2 centimeters per 100 meters. That's less than the angle of a hipster barrister's hat, yet it was enough to keep the water flowing. But why all the fuss about water, you might ask? Surely, people could just walk to a well or the river. Well, here's the kicker. Rome was expanding faster than a politician's promises. By 312 BCE, it had grown from a small town to a bustling metropolis. The population was ballooning, civic pride was soaring, and the city was in desperate need of infrastructure to match its ambitions. Plus, clean water wasn't just a luxury. It was a public health necessity. Without it, Romans were as vulnerable as gladiators facing lions in the arena. Now, let's not kid ourselves. Politics played a massive role in the aqueduct's creation. Appius Claudius wasn't just doing it for the love of Rome. He was stacking his resume. By providing a solution to the city's water woes, he was also making a powerful statement about Roman ingenuity and stability. It was political theater at its finest, and the audience, the Roman populace, was eating it up faster than they could chug a cup of Pasca, the Roman equivalent of a cheap beer. Of course, any great project comes with its fair share of challenges. The Romans had to contend with land acquisition, labor shortages, and engineering puzzles that would make a modern-day project manager break out in hives. But they were nothing if not resourceful. Slaves and soldiers were often put to work digging tunnels and laying stone, a grim reminder that progress sometimes rides on the backs of the oppressed. Yet, the Roman knack for organization and discipline turned these challenges into stepping stones, quite literally, for their engineering feats. As the Aqueducts began to transform Rome, the aqueducts became more than just conduits for water. They were conduits of power and prestige. They symbolized the reach of Roman authority and the promise of civilization's benefits. But behind the romantic image of water flowing seamlessly into the heart of Rome lay the gritty reality of hard labor, political maneuvering, and a city grappling with the growing pains of expansion. Thus, the story of the Roman aqueducts begins not with an idealistic vision, but with a very human need for survival and a political landscape as turbulent as the waters they sought to tame. The Aqueducts was just the start, a humble beginning for what would become one of the ancient world's most impressive feats of engineering, and a testament to Rome's enduring legacy. As the Aqueducts made its debut, the Romans were just getting started. By the 3rd century CE, the city boasted over 260 miles of aqueducts, a feat that would make even modern civil engineers tip their hard hats in respect. These marvels of engineering didn't just trickle water into Rome, they gushed it in with the force of 1,000 broken dams. Some aqueducts stretched over 60 miles from their sources, a distance that would make even the most determined marathon runner think twice. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. How did these stone serpents so effectively slither across landscapes both rugged and smooth? The secret lay in the Romans' knack for turning the mundane into the masterful. They didn't invent the arch, but when you have a tool that's as reliable as a Roman soldier's loyalty, why reinvent the wheel? Arches allowed the aqueducts to span valleys like a stone-cast spider web, defying gravity and common sense with equal aplomb. These structures were not only practical, but also grandiose expressions of Roman might. Imagine walking under a towering arcade of shimmering water as it soared above you, each arch a testament to Roman ingenuity, and let's be real, their flair for the dramatic. But arches were just the opening act. The real showstopper, the inverted siphon. Picture this, a U-shaped pipe descending into a valley and then rising again, defying the natural order with the audacity of a Roman politician dodging accountability. The siphon allowed water to flow uphill by creating pressure, a trick of physics that must have seemed as magical as summoning Jupiter himself. And it worked. These siphons were critical in traversing the undulating Italian terrain, keeping the water flowing where it was needed most. Now, you might be wondering, why go through all this trouble just for water? And the Romans have just dug more wells or built a couple more cisterns. Well, dear listener, that's like asking why a peacock bathers with its tail feathers. Sure, you could survive without the flair, but where's the fun in that? For the Romans, aqueducts were more than just plumbing. They were a public declaration of Rome's dominance and sophistication. Water was a status symbol, a clear, cascading reminder that Rome was the heart of civilization, a city that turned necessity into art. Moving from the grand to the granular, let's talk numbers. The Aqua Claudia, one of the most impressive aqueducts, stretched an astonishing 69 kilometers, or about 43 miles. It took 14 years to construct, a time commitment that rivals any modern infrastructure project. And the cost? Let's just say, if you thought your water bill was high, try funding an entire aqueduct network. Yet, for the Romans, the investment was worth it. The Aqua Claudia alone could transport 190,000 cubic meters of water per day, enough to quench the thirst of over 1 million Roman citizens and their extensive public baths. Of course, this aquatic extravaganza came with its own set of challenges. The logistics of construction were a nightmare that would make even the most seasoned project manager sweat. The Romans had to account for terrain changes, material transport, and labor coordination, all without the help of modern technology or, heaven forbid, a smartphone app. Instead, they relied on good old-fashioned manpower, often in the form of soldiers and slaves, whose toil and sweat were as integral to the aqueducts as the stone and mortar. Yet, for all their ingenuity, the Romans had their myths. One popular legend claims that Roman engineers could calculate the precise gradient needed for water to flow over vast distances, a feat that sounds as plausible as a Roman chariot with a GPS system. In reality, it was often a process of trial and error, with adjustments made on the fly. But who can blame the Romans for wanting to spin a good yarn? After all, history is written by the victors, and the Romans were nothing if not victorious. The aqueducts also served as a reflection of Roman society's values, efficiency and extravagance. On one hand, they exemplified precision engineering, with every stone and every angle meticulously planned to maximize flow and minimize loss. On the other, they embodied Rome's flair for the grandiose, turning a basic necessity into a spectacle of power. They were, in essence, a stone-cold flex, an architectural mic drop that declared Rome's supremacy in no uncertain terms. As the aqueducts snaked their way into the heart of Rome, they transformed not just the landscape, but the very fabric of Roman life. Public baths became social hubs, fountains adorned public squares, and private homes boasted indoor plumbing that made even the wealthiest citizens of other civilizations green with envy. It was a transformation as profound as it was practical, a testament to Rome's ability to turn the ordinary into the extraordinary. But let's not forget the darker side of this aquatic ambition. The labor required to build these marvels was grueling and often dangerous. The workforce was predominantly made up of slaves, and the lower classes, people for whom the aqueducts were both a source of employment and a symbol of their subjugation. It's a sobering reminder that progress often comes at a cost, one that is borne disproportionately by those at the bottom of the social ladder. Yet, despite these harsh realities, the aqueducts stand as a testament to Roman engineering prowess, an enduring legacy that has fascinated historians and engineers alike. They are a reminder that while the Romans could be ruthless, they were also capable of extraordinary feats of imagination and innovation. As we continue to explore this labyrinthine history, the story of the Roman aqueducts unfolds not just as a tale of water, but as a narrative of human ambition, ingenuity, and the relentless pursuit of greatness. Stay tuned as we dive deeper into the world of Roman aqueducts, where every stone has a story, and every drop of water carries the weight of history. The Roman aqueducts weren't just about quenching the parched throats of citizens. They transformed Roman society in ways that would make a modern urban planner green with envy. Picture a city where water flows as freely as political promises during election season. Public baths, once the preserve of the elite, became the epicenter of social life. These were the ancient world's answer to today's coffee shops, where Romans gathered to exchange gossip, strike business deals, and occasionally bathe. Now, let's talk numbers. By the 1st century CE, Rome boasted 11 aqueducts, supplying over 1 million cubic meters of water daily. That's about 264 million gallons for those thinking in American. This water didn't just trickle into the city, cascaded into grand public baths like the baths of Caracalla and the baths of Diocletian, which could accommodate thousands at a time. Imagine a space the size of a modern-day shopping mall, but instead of consumer goods, it offered warm waters, steam rooms, and social networking in its rawest form. These public baths were more than just places to scrub the day's grime away. They were societal equalizers. For a small fee, even the humblest Roman could hobnob with senators, all while soaking in a communal tub. It was a democratic concept, at least in theory. In reality, the elite still had their private chambers, but the illusion of shared luxury was as enticing as a toga party invitation. But the aqueduct's impact didn't stop at the bathhouse doors. Fountains adorned every major intersection, turning the city into a veritable wonderland of waterworks. These fountains weren't just decorative. They were essential to urban life. Public access to clean water reduced disease and improved sanitation, which was no small feat in a city as densely packed as Rome. Think of them as ancient fire hydrants, but with a lot more pizzazz. With all this water flowing freely, Rome became a beacon of civilization, a city where luxury dripped from every aqueduct arch like a well-tuned marketing campaign. Yet, as with most things in history, there was a catch. Maintaining these engineering marvels required serious coin and savvy political maneuvering. Enter the curators aquarum, the water commissioners. These guys were the unsung heroes, or perhaps the unsung villains, depending on which side of the aqueduct you stood. The job of a curator aquarum was as much about managing resources as it was about managing egos. These officials wielded significant power, controlling water distribution, and by extension, the city's health and prosperity. Imagine a role where you're part engineer, part politician, and part mob boss. Their decisions could make or break political careers, and their favor was as coveted as a seat in the Senate. But here's where the plot thickens. The Roman aqueduct system was as much about politics as it was about plumbing. The construction and maintenance of these aqueducts were perfect opportunities for political patronage. Wealthy senators could score major brownie points by funding repairs or expansions, thus cementing their legacy in stone, literally. It was a classic case of you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, with water as the currency of choice. And let's not forget the labor force that made it all possible. While Rome bathed in luxury, slaves and laborers broke their backs laying stones and maintaining channels. For them, the aqueducts were less a symbol of Roman grandeur and more a daily grind. Their work was grueling, often dangerous, and largely thankless. Yet their toil ensured that the city's fountains and baths flowed without interruption. It's a stark reminder that the glories of Rome were built on the sweat and suffering of the many, not just the vision of the few. So, as we revel in the romance of Roman leisure, let's remember that it came at a cost that was often hidden beneath the polished marble and flowing water. The aqueducts were a triumph of engineering and a testament to Roman ingenuity, but they also laid bare the social inequities that lurked beneath the surface of this great civilization. As we continue to peel back the layers of this watery tale, we'll delve deeper into the economics of Roman waterworks, exploring how this essential resource became a tool of power and control. Stay tuned as we navigate the currents of history, where every aqueduct carries not just water, but the weight of human ambition and folly. As we navigate the watery highways of ancient Rome, let's dive headfirst into the myths and legends that swirl around these aqueducts, like the Tiber's floodwaters after a particularly rainy Roman winter. The Romans, ever the PR wizards, didn't just build aqueducts. They wrapped them in tales as grandiose as a senator's toga. Take the story of the Aqua Virgo, for instance. Legend has it that a young girl led Roman soldiers to a pristine spring, an act so pure it demanded a divine name. In reality, the Aqua Virgo was less about virginal maidens and more about the strategic need to supply water to Agrippa's grand public baths. But hey, who can resist a good story when you're trying to impress the masses? It's a classic case of ancient spin, where reality was as malleable as the lead pipes used to channel the water. Speaking of pipes, it's time to burst another bubble. The Romans had a reputation for engineering precision that sounds as flawless as Augustus's public image. Yet in practice, things were a tad more chaotic. Maintenance was a Herculean task, akin to keeping a chariot on course with one wheel in a ditch. Water theft was rampant, with crafty Romans tapping into the system like ancient hackers. Imagine living in a city where water piracy was a legitimate concern, and not just a plot line in a pirate-themed drama. Now, let's talk about the propaganda machine that was the Roman Empire. The aqueducts served as both literal lifelines and metaphorical megaphones, broadcasting Rome's superiority. The message was clear. Come to Rome, where the water flows and civilization thrives. It was as much about optics as it was about utility, with aqueducts acting as stone billboards proclaiming Roman dominance. But beneath the marble veneer lay a gritty reality. The upkeep of these monumental structures was a constant struggle, demanding a workforce as vast as the empire itself. The Roman state employed a small army of aquarii, water workers, tasked with the thankless job of ensuring that every drop reached its intended destination. These unsung heroes were the backbone of the system, fighting against decay and disruption with tools as rudimentary as Roman justice. Yet the aqueducts were not immune to the pitfalls of politics. Corruption seeped into the waterworks like an underground spring. Funds meant for repairs often trickled into the pockets of unscrupulous officials faster than water through a breach. It's a tale as old as time, where the line between public service and personal gain was as murky as the Tiber itself. In the grand theater of Roman life, aqueducts were both stage and backdrop. They shaped the city's destiny, dictating everything from urban planning to public health. But they also exposed the vulnerabilities of an empire that, despite its grandeur, was as susceptible to cracks in its facade as any mortal creation. The Romans may have been masters of stone and water, but they were also human, with all the attendant flaws and foibles. As we draw nearer to the end of our journey, remember this. The aqueducts are more than just relics of a bygone era. They are a testament to human ambition, a monument to the endless pursuit of progress. And like all great stories, they remind us that beneath the legends lies a tapestry of truth, woven from the threads of history and myth alike. Stay with us as we continue to explore the labyrinth of Roman aqueducts, where each turn reveals new insights into the empire that once ruled the known world. There's more water to wade through, more secrets to uncover, and more history to bring to life. So, as we wade deeper into the aqueduct's legacy, let's turn the clock forward and see just how these ancient marvels continue to splash their influence across modern landscapes. Imagine this, an empire that once stood as the pinnacle of human achievement, its echoes now whispering through the water systems of contemporary cities. The Roman aqueducts, though crumbling and overgrown in some parts, are more than just picturesque ruins. They're the architectural ancestors of today's urban waterworks. Fast forward a couple of millennia, and you'll find that the Roman obsession with water management wasn't just a historical footnote, it was a blueprint. Modern engineers still tip their hard hats to Roman innovations like the arch and the siphon, those stone sinews and liquid nerves that defied gravity and common sense. If you've ever turned on a tap and marveled at the flow, you've got the Romans to thank, at least in part. They taught us that with the right gradient and a bit of stone-cold determination, water could be channeled, controlled, and commodified. But let's not get misty-eyed without a reality check. The Roman aqueducts also remind us of the empire's darker side, a civilization that, while visionary, was also built on the backs of the enslaved and the oppressed. This duality is the real legacy of Rome, a city of advancement and exploitation, brilliance and brutality. In modern terms, it's like admiring a skyscraper without acknowledging the sweat and sacrifice that went into each steel beam. Now, let's dive into the economics of it all. Roman aqueducts were costly endeavors, a luxury funded by the spoils of conquest and the taxes of the conquered. The Aqua Marcia, for instance, cost a pretty penny, approximately 180 million sestertii, which would make any ancient accountant clutch their abacus. Yet, this was a price Rome was willing to pay for prestige and power. Today, we mirror this principle with billion-dollar infrastructure projects that promise to propel us into the future while occasionally bankrupting the present. As for urban planning, the Romans were ahead of their time. They understood that a city could only grow as far as its water could reach. This foresight is mirrored in today's sprawling metropolises, where water is the lifeblood of urban expansion. The Roman approach to water distribution, public fountains, baths, and private connections, set the stage for modern amenities that we now take for granted. So next time you enjoy a long, hot shower, consider it a Roman luxury with a contemporary twist. Tourists today flock to see these ancient aqueducts, wandering through arches that once ferried water with the precision of a Swiss watch. The sheer scale and ambition of these structures continue to inspire awe and, dare I say, a touch of envy among modern architects. After all, who wouldn't want their work to stand the test of time, admired by generations long after the original builders have turned to dust? Yet, while we marvel at the aqueducts, let's also learn from Rome's mistakes. Their water system, as sophisticated as it was, couldn't prevent the empire's eventual decline. Political corruption, economic troubles, and overexpansion were cracks in the facade that even the most robust aqueduct couldn't bridge. It's a cautionary tale for our times, reminding us that no matter how advanced our technology, the human element, fallible and fraught, is always part of the equation. In the end, the Roman aqueducts are a testament to human ingenuity and folly. They encapsulate the complex interplay between necessity and ambition, serving as both a beacon of progress and a monument to empire's inevitable decay. As we stand on the shoulders of these ancient giants, balancing progress with humility might just be the lesson we need to carry forward. So, as you ponder these ancient waterworks, remember, history isn't just a dusty relic. It's the undercurrent guiding our modern world. And like the aqueducts, each story carries the weight of human ambition, ingenuity, and the occasional folly, reminding us that the past is always flowing beneath the surface.